What if the Cullens attended Hogwarts? Part 9. EPOV. Remilda looked wary as she caught sight of my family and me. Now that I was free of the artificial emotions she deplanted with her spell, I felt no guilt as I entered her mind. I wonder why he's shirtless. Yum. Oh, I hope he hasn't killed Bella. That wouldn't look good. Never before had I wanted so badly to maim a human being, not even when I'd been forced to listen to the sick fantasies of Mike Newton. If the girl's pathetic lack of a conscience had infuriated me a minute ago, it almost sent me over the edge now. Still, I didn't allow myself to lose control. I wanted my revenge too much for that, and I had a point to prove, not only to Remilda Vane, but to every other human occupying that space. I smiled sweetly at her, fake adoration filling my expression. Her rapid heartbeat slowed a little, until a sickly smile formed on her face. "Edward," Carlyle warned as I held out my hand. "He's not going to kill her, Carlyle," Alice whispered, too low for the humans to hear. Wasn't I? I sure as hell wanted to. Not only had that stupid, selfish witch endangered Bella, she'd also put the possibility of Renesmee at risk. Without her mother, my beautiful daughter would never have the chance to live. I had almost lost the two most important beings in my world in the space of 5 minutes, all because of the repulsive, self-centered creature standing opposite me. At the affectionate gesture, Remilda sashayed past her gawking friends, pleased by their jealousy. Not for long, I thought, venom pooling in my mouth. Behind me, Carlyle bristled. While he wished no harm upon the girl, he believed she and others needed to learn the lesson I was about to give them, if only to prevent putting Bella in a similar situation in the future. Still, I doubt he would have been able to simply stand by without Alice's promise. Like Rosalie, her scowl deepened with every step the witch took. Jasper had a hard time keeping the disgust off his face, and not only because he was feeding off the emotions of the others. If Alice had been the one in Bella's shoes, Jasper would have had no problem murdering the culprit after having his senses restored. Having said that, Alice would have had no problem murdering the culprit before that could have happened. Remilda's warm hand fell into my open palm. The second it did, I spun her round at vampiric speed, pulling her arm behind her back. A sickening click and a shriek of pain pierced the air as her shoulder dislocated, causing the bones to protrude at an unnatural angle. The surrounding children gasped and stumbled back. Venom welled in my mouth as the smell of their fear seeped into the air. It soaked it up like a sponge, until the scent was almost an entity of its own. Ignoring it became almost impossible. Everything in that space, the accelerated heartbeats, the adrenaline, the heavy breathing, the beads of perspiration, everything intensified the scent hanging in the atmosphere, thus fueling the bloodlust which I had previously worked so hard to tame. Remilda sobbed as my grip tightened. My eyes caught the vein in her neck, which throbbed against the delicate membrane. I wanted so badly to rip it open. I wanted so badly to make her pay for what she'd done, for what she'd almost made me do. Behind me, Carlyle fearfully searched the psychic's face. Alice shrugged nonchalantly. "I said he wouldn't kill her." Our father's thoughts were horrified as he processed my sister's words. He couldn't believe that I had it in me to willingly torture a human, nor could he believe that Alice had it in her to act so insouciantly as she allowed me to do so. We were his protégés after all, controlled and responsible as a result of his teachings, yet there we were, mercilessly inflicting pain like common, heartless vampires. I bent my head to the witch's neck, and ran my nose along her skin. She whimpered. I smiled. "What's wrong, Remilda? I thought this was what you wanted, a vampire's kiss." Stupidly, she struggled against my hold, screaming again at the pain it caused her shoulder. "Edward, please, you hurting me, am I?" I asked, faking shock. I let go of her arm, before spinning her back around to face me. I wanted her to see my total lack of sympathy, to know how entirely I despised her. Her eyes widened with fear, brimming with tears as she gazed into my black glare. Just as I was about to growl out my warning to tell her that if she ever pulled a similar stunt again, I would rip her to shreds and feed her to Fang, Hagrid's dopey bloodhound, the portrait suddenly swung open. Bella's expression was calm and composed as she marched in with my mother. She showed no surprise at all at my cruel behavior, nor did the sight of Remilda's damaged shoulders seem to faze her. The crowds parted to admit her, the eyes of the Gryffindors still wide with fear. What do you think they going to do? Viola Knight whispered to Amicus Fortison. The two stood off to the side, both looking worried and simultaneously elated. Amicus shrugged. Probably chop of her head and use it as a quaffle. I smirked. The idea had potential. My gaze flew from the sniveling girl to Bella. After studying the injury a moment longer, she met my eyes with a look of the utmost seriousness. Her head flicked to my brothers and sisters, all of whom were continuing to leer at the whimpering witch in my clutch. Although I understood what Bella was asking me to do, I wasn't finished with Remilda. I wanted to frighten her so much that she'd never dare to lay eyes on me again. Still, if I continued to touch her for much longer, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to leave her alive, and so I bent down until my face was level with hers, and delivered the last words I would ever speak to her. I should kill you for what you've done, I said slowly. A fresh flood of tears spilled down her cheeks. Her lips quivered in fear, as she continued to breathe unevenly. If you so much as look at me again, I won't hurt you, I'll destroy you. Do you understand me? Without a word, Remilda nodded. I leaned in closer, leaving only an inch to separate us. The tiny hairs on her white skin bristled with the proximity. They trembled violently as I suddenly released a deafening guttural roar. The children in the room screamed and jumped back, thrown into a terrified frenzy by the primitive burst. The girl, meanwhile, was trembling like a leaf, and only then did I retreat, but not before I spun her around to face Bella. Bella stepped forwards. For a long time, she said nothing, and simply stared into the eyes of the sobbing witch, which were now puffy and red. Without warning, she mechanically lifted her arm, and shot a spell from her wand. Remilda screamed in pain as her joints snapped back into their proper position. Her initial relief soon faded when she realized my fiancé hadn't finished. That's why Edward didn't kill me. So that she could. I am sorry, cried Remilda, stumbling backward. Gold seemed to ooze from Bella's pupils as she stalked towards her newest rival. The lioness was close, angrily prowling beneath the surface. The more she clawed for release, the clearer her thoughts echoed in my head. Thinks she can steal my Edward. My vampire. I grinned. Finally, Remilda backed into a wall, leaving nowhere else for her to go. She was trapped, like a rabbit in a burrow. Please, I won't do it again. Damn right you won't. What you did tonight was beyond reckless. That man, growled Bella, her voice low and deadly as she pointed in my direction, is a vampire, not some yellow-eyed teddy bear you can snuggle up with when it suits you. There was something very enjoyable about watching Bella bare her teeth at Remilda. The pleasure was only heightened when I thought of how large those teeth could become, and all within a matter of seconds. What I don't understand, said the golden-eyed witch, is how you managed to pull it off. Your scent should have been all over that cup, but I got a whiff of it myself this morning, after you left the common room on the arm of my fiancé. I got nothing, no scent that would link the potion back to you. So how did you do it? As Bella's acerbic hiss, Remilda trembled against the wall, before finally stuttering, INN never touched the cup. I used a hover charm to get it into the dorm. The thoughts of my family thundered in outrage. Emmett even had to restrain Rosalie, who leaned towards the girl, possessed of a hungry look. Wow, that's low. You read better than I gave you credit for, Bella said in disgust. She shook her head, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I had no sympathy for Remilda. She thought it was okay to mess with the lives of those around her, and for that, she deserved everything she got as far as I was concerned. Bella seemed to agree. She inched forwards, her molten glare furious and penetrating as it held her rival's eyes. This isn't the first time either, is it? You tried to get Harry 2 years ago. Try it again, Remilda, and, next time, I won't stop the Cullens, or lift a finger to help. If you ever put me, or anyone else for that matter, in a position like that again, on your head be it. Remilda gulped and nodded. Bella stared into her eyes for a second longer, all traces of warm chocolate banished by livid molten honey. Finally satisfied, she turned away, leaving the unworthy Gryffindor to flee the scene. Remilda Vane bolted for the girls' staircase, and ran to her dorm to lick her wounds. Bella, on the other hand, approached me and took my hand, before leading me in the opposite direction. We left my family and the crowds of Gryffindors behind, both of us hungry for privacy, which only the come-and-go room could offer us. The harp didn't play that night, nor was the bed sprinkled with rose petals. I could only conclude that the room sensed our mood, and realized that now was not the time to play matchmaker. I couldn't even look at Bella. I was too ashamed for that, and sat with my back to her on the edge of the mattress. I felt her move towards me, and pressed my hands tightly against my sides, determined to keep myself from touching her. I didn't deserve that privilege, not after nearly killing her. Whether it was my fault or not was irrelevant. Delicate hands crept over my shoulders. I could feel their heat through the fabric of my clothing. Sighing, I shifted forwards, breaking the contact. Edward. Whether I could read her mind or not, I knew exactly what she was about to say. Don T. Bella. My sullen command was met with a brief silence, which fed the tension already forming between us. Are you mad at me? Bella asked suddenly. My mouth gaped open in shock. Without thinking, I shot up from the bed and spun to face my fiancé, the air whistling at my speed. What? Are you mad at me? Was this for real? Had I just experienced a completely different evening to the girl perched on the bed? Incredulously, I searched her face. A genuine furrow had materialized on her brow, above a pair of worried eyes. You. Why on earth would I be mad at you? My eyes slammed shut in fury. The anger was not Bella's doing, but I still couldn't stand to look at her. She was innocent. Too innocent, perhaps. Too trusting. Too willing to overlook my flaws. Seeing her, in the light of myself, made my own monstrousness seem all the more pronounced. I heard, rather than saw, her climb off the bed, the covers rustling as she shifted. I felt her breath on my face as she approached me. Aren't you disgusted with me? My eyes snapped open again at the fear in her voice, which was barely more than a whisper. For what I asked you to do in the classroom. Ah, that, yes, that. Suddenly, her worries made sense, but, of course, I wasn't mad with her. Why would I be disgusted? I asked, relaxing against her warm body. It wasn't the first time you've asked. She bit her lip. No, but I kind of took advantage of you, didn't I? Again, she was getting it all wrong. Backwards. Bella, I exhaled, shaking my head in exasperation. I was planning on killing you. I think that's the more serious issue here. No, she argued, lowering her eyes, that wasn't you. You weren't my Edward then. That was the magic, it twisted and distorted the real you. But I was in complete control of myself, and I still tried to get you to. I quickly placed a finger on her lips to silence her. I couldn't hear what she had been about to say, the memories were still too fresh. They thundered in my head like the deafening clash of cymbals, drowning out every other coherent thought. Bella's scent was all over me, stronger than ever. Of course it was. I'd done things tonight that I'd never dared to before. I couldn't imagine myself having an angel sat on one shoulder instead. I envisioned a gentleman Edward, clothed in tails and a top hat, holding a cane. On the other, I pictured a sloppy student Edward, with messy hair, top button undone on an untucked shirt, and a tie loose about his neck, possibly a trident in hand. How could you? Cried the gentleman. You had no right to touch Bella in such a way. She's a lady. Keep your hands to yourself. Oh, can it? Cried the student, batting the gentleman over the head with the trident. Edward did nothing wrong. Why should it matter when he and Bella are going to spend their lives together anyway? It's a matter of timing. Blah. It's a matter of the inevitable. Bella enjoyed it. Student pointed accusingly at gentleman. She never made those noises with you. Why, you little. The gentleman brandished his cane, while the mischievous student thrust forward the trident. I shook my head, attempting to banish images from my mind of the pair dueling across my collar. If I was honest with myself, I knew that I couldn't suppress either facet of my conscience. It was silly to even try. I couldn't tell myself that I didn't want Bella in the same way that my brothers wanted their wives. I couldn't ignore the memories of what I'd done in the classroom, or pretend that I didn't enjoy them. At the same time, however, there's something new that I had to consider. Although I had no idea whether my honeymoon with Bella would bring about Renesmee, the research I had carried out with Jasper and Emmett indicated that it was certainly a possibility, and so I couldn't afford to loosen my hold on my control until August. Bella, I don't blame you for what happened, I sighed. In your situation, if I thought that I only had minutes left to spend with you, I probably would have asked the same. I smiled, lifting my hand to stroke her cheek. Of course, I am not mad, or disgusted. Quite the opposite actually. Really. I chuckled at her surprise. Did she think I aspired to be a monk or something? Slowly but surely, a small smile climbed its way onto her face. Soon, however, the memory of my almost killing her resurfaced, and my own smile faltered. By now, Bella knew me well enough to be able to read the signs of my mood. An annoyed groan broke through her lips. She grabbed at my neck, and pulled herself onto her tiptoes, until her eyes were almost level with mine. Now, listen here. What happened tonight was not your fault. I arched an eyebrow as she enunciated each word. So you annoyed that you couldn't fight the effects of the potion. I have news for you, nobody can. To be angry that it affected you, well, that's a vampire's arrogance if ever I saw it. A vampire's arrogance, I repeated, feeling my eyes narrow to slits. Bella nodded. All defense teachers seem to have the same opinion of you lot. Because of your strength and speed, you think you invincible, she smirked, clearly trying not to laugh, and so you take greater offense when you realize that's not actually the case. I tried to protest, but Bella cut me off before I could voice my argument. Would you blame someone who had had their drink spiked for anything they did afterward? Stubbornly, I held my tongue. Bella, meanwhile, arched her eyebrows, determinedly awaiting my answer. That's different. How? It just is, I argued. My reply earned me a swat to the chest. No, it isn't, and you know it. She insisted, placing her hands on her hips. You a classic rehypnol statistic, only you blaming yourself when none of this was your fault. Stop telling yourself that you should have been able to fight the drug. If it had been one of the others, Carlisle, Emmett, or Jasper, they would have forgotten their mates just as easily. I winced at that. Bella noticed. The sympathy was clear in the set of her mouth. To say that I had forgotten her during the most recent and highly unpleasant, mostly unpleasant episode of our lives was entirely inaccurate. I had not forgotten Bella. That much had become clear in the classroom. I had still experienced the usual overwhelming desire for her. The love potion could not remove that. Rather, it acted like an enormous obstruction, like a mountain-sized boulder that was almost impossible to see around. The others wouldn't have tried to slaughter someone in that situation, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed that. Neither did Bella, it seemed. I doubt that, she murmured ominously, holding my eyes. Love potion fuels lust and obsession. Who's to say that type of magic wouldn't have a secondary effect on vampires? Maybe you right. I shrugged. The witch's lips twitched at the corners. Perhaps she sensed an easy victory. I certainly didn't want to continue this depressing discussion. It was easier to let her convince me that she was right, which was why, instead of continuing with my moping, I wound my arms around her, and pulled her closer. Bella grinned. That's more like it. I chuckled and rolled my eyes, before deciding to change the subject. I was massively in need of a distraction. So tell me more about these defense classes. What else do you think you know about us vampires? BPOV. It turned out that Edward got to find out firsthand what the students of Hogwarts learnt about the undead. It was over a month later when he and his siblings were asked to take part in a defense workshop. Talk about the Remilda fiasco soon died. It turned out to be nothing more than another day at Hogwarts. Still, the students regarded the Cullens a bit more warily, having been reminded of their true nature. Remilda Vane avoided us at all costs. She kept her eyes down whenever we were at the table together, and always sat on the opposite side of the common room. I had written to Jake since the incident. In his reply, he told me that he and the wolves had been having a blast with Charlie. Charlie had seen what the pack could do since my trip to the hospital, and now they were all getting on like a house on fire. We bought tickets for Quidditch. He scribbled excitedly. We heading off to England next month to watch the Falmouth Falcons versus the Tutshill Tornadoes. I can't wait. Charlie says that you play. This is something I have to see, Bella. I just can't imagine it. According to Jake, the pack and my dad would be making the most of their trip across continents. After catching the game, they planned on heading back down the flow to London. They wanted to do some sightseeing. I could see it now, Jake and Seth posing next to a palace guard, possibly making fun of his large, furry hat and frozen expression. The thought cracked me up every single time it entered my head. Edward didn't mind my correspondence with Jacob. He found far too much amusement in hearing about my owl's relationship with the pack. They didn't share an easy friendship. Jacob complained many a time in his letter that Talto had nipped him on numerous occasions. Apparently, now that my feathered pet had finally managed to bond with the Cullens, and had formed a relationship based entirely on trust and friendship, he seemed to find it necessary to demonstrate his loyalty to Edward, and, thus, took every possible opportunity to make Jacob and the wolves uncomfortable. If it wasn't Bella, your damn bird left worms in my bed, it was Bella. I can see through my windows. They recovered with feces. Edward's particular favorite was damn it, Bella. Your bird stole my underwear. I woke up this morning naked, I might add, to find that all my pants and boxers had been moved to the roof. The roof. I had to climb up there in a towel. It didn't help that Talto had somehow managed to assemble the neighbors. The pack are never going to let me live it down. Every time he returned, Talto would land on the table at breakfast and perform his victory shuffle. Edward cheered and clapped, along with the other vampires, before proceeding to spoil the owl with an abundance of treats. This, of course, only encouraged Talto to think up more elaborate pranks to perform the next time he visited the Olympic Peninsula, much to Jacob's irritation. Aside from that, the only other thing of interest was Quidditch. Slytherin won their match against Ravenclaw, which really increased the pressure to do well in the final game. Harry worked the team like never before. For the rest of February and the first few weeks of March, it felt as if I spent every waking hour on the pitch, practicing my pass with Viola and Ginny, and avoiding bludgers sent at me by Jimmy and Amicus. We practiced moves that I'd never tried before, ones that pushed us to the very peak of airborne coordination and agility. The Kobe corkscrew was by far the most difficult. Harry wanted Ginny, Viola and me to recreate the Quidditch move we had witnessed at the World Cup. We need to show them that we re the ones with the skill, he'd say. That was all well and good, but he wasn't the one sustaining broken bones. In our attempt to perfect the maneuver, we managed to break 13 bones between us, which stirred great concern in Edward and Carlisle. Emmett, on the other hand, grinned like a maniac each time one of us received a new injury, and would flip open his notebook to add another tally to the chart. He said that it was encouraging to know the team would make such sacrifices to secure a victory. In his eyes, the more blood the better. You were worthy, young swan, he declared one night in the common room, after I returned from the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey had healed my fractured rib. May the gods of Quidditch look down on you and smile. Our practice eventually seemed to pay off. Ginny and I finally managed to spiral Viola as she flew towards the goal hoops without causing injury to her or ourselves. As time went on, we tightened the spiral, until our corkscrew was practically perfect. Executing the move in the actual game would provide the match highlight. Of that, I was confident. Outside the world of wizarding sport, a sinister calm had settled. The Death Eaters hadn't dared to make a move since their last failed attempt at turning a ministry official. We didn't get any closer to making a new discovery, despite the seer's promise, yet Edward stubbornly stuck to his suspicions regarding Iago Cleedon, even without evidence. Alpheus Truman was discharged from St. Mungo's the day before the Easter holidays. The Minister for Magic sent word of his condition. Apparently, he was in a much better state of mind. Despite that, he could not remember being confounded, thus making Edward's insistence that Saber was at fault all the more problematic. We couldn't prove anything. The rest of the Cullens grew tired of Edward's suspicions. No one believed him. I wish I could have said that I had complete faith, but there were too many things that made no sense, like the fact that Saber's scent didn't match the Occlumens who had attacked me on Halloween. I failed completely to see how he fit into the plot. And we were still no closer to discovering his Imperious accomplice. 2 villains, 1 unimperious Occlumens, and 1 bewitched witcher wizard with no mental shield. Edward grumbled to himself as we descended the grand staircase to the Great Hall. Professor Martin had organized a practical session for the last lesson of the half-term. He was going to teach us how to escape a vampire attack. All NEWT students would be present, including Edward, Emmett, Rosalie, Alice and Jasper, who had all agreed to assist the professor. It helped that they had a free period last thing on Fridays. Martin was standing stiffly on the raised platform when we entered, hands by his side, dressed in a navy suit. The tables had been cleared from the room to provide more space for the students to work. As you all know, the professor said, once everyone had arrived, today you will be learning how to escape a vampire attack. As this lesson will involve apparition, Professor McGonagall has removed the anti-apparition spells from the Great Hall and Entrance Hall specifically. Those among you who have yet to earn your license will not take part in the practical. You will record the theory only. Martin then pointed to the benches on either side of the room. Excluding vampires, everybody take a seat. After shooting a wary glance at the teacher, I reluctantly pulled away from Edward and joined my friends. I sat between Harry and Luna, the second of whom was sporting a necklace made of small silver bells laced with thin blue ribbon. Nice necklace. Oh, thank you, Bella. Luna beamed, stroking the center bell. I watched curiously as she gave the ribbon a shake, jangling the little instruments. It's for attracting Nogglebots. At my blank stare, my friend was kind enough to elaborate. A Nogglebot is a fairy-like creature with scales and tusks. Really? That's interesting. They really are. Luna nodded with a dreamy, far-off gaze. Daddy's seen them hanging around the wind chimes. They attracted to the sounds. Plus, they enjoy the dirigible plums. Why do you want to meet one? Harry pressed, leaning around me to listen to our eccentric peer. He seemed genuinely interested in her odd assertions. She smiled widely. Their tusks are coated with a substance that increases intuition. They very lucky creatures. Daddy is petitioning to have them. Now, called Martin. Everyone else in the room fell silent, including Luna. I am going to demonstrate how to evade a vampire. This procedure is only to be used if you are under direct threat. Otherwise, do not draw attention to yourself or your magic. He then extracted a honey-colored wand from the inside pocket of his jacket. It wasn't the longest wand I had ever seen, but its simple design hinted at sturdiness. He pointed it at Emmett, who was standing by the large doors with his wife, brothers, and sister. Emmett rubbed his hands in anticipation as the professor took a step down from the platform. On the count of 3, I want you to run at me. Is that it? My future brother-in-law arched an eyebrow, seeming slightly disappointed. Aren't we going to duel or something? You don't own a wand. Duel as in fight. I attack you, you fight back. Why on earth would we do that? Martin looked genuinely stumped as he frowned back at Emmett. Never mind, Emmett muttered, rolling his eyes. On the count of 3 then. I leaned forward in anticipation as Martin resumed his stance, wand held out in front of him, aimed at his undead opponent. 1. Emmett crouched, ready to push off from the ground. 2. I held my breath. 3. Emmett bolted, his muscles pumping him forwards at dizzying speed. His bear-like roar filled the hall as he surged towards the defense teacher. Protega! Cried Martin, shooting a transparent shield through the air. There was a crack like thunder as Emmett collided with the 10 by 10-foot barrier. Thanks to his perfect balance, he managed to save himself from falling, but didn't he have time to react further before his target spun on his heels and dissipated. The pop was followed immediately by a second, the sound appearing to come from the entrance hall. Martin ambled in a moment later, joining the other Cullens by the great doors. They made way for him as he approached. He passed them without a second glance, his eyes instead traveling over the students on either side of the room. This method of escape is simple, yet effective, he explained. A vampire's reflexes are impeccable, but very few know of the existence of our kind. In the event of an attack, a vampire will not expect to be faced with magic. This will give you an advantage. You can use a shield to temporarily stun your opponent, giving you the short amount of time needed to make a quick escape. Emmett watched the teacher with a look of annoyance. He'd definitely been hoping to play a more active role and show off his skills. You will be practicing this in today's lesson. Split yourselves into 5 groups and form lines. You will take it in turns to shield and disapparate. Make sure you aim for the entrance hall. And that was about as much instruction as he gave us. I teamed up with the other Gryffindors, all of whom insisted that I go first, since I was more familiar than anyone with vampire attack. Edward grinned mischievously from the other side of the hall. I am glad we didn't get Emmett, Seamus whispered to Dean. We'd have no chance. You would have had a better chance with him than Edward, I corrected, without breaking eye contact. Edward's the fastest. Behind me, the Irish wizard huffed. Just my bleedin' luck. First challengers step forward, Martin commanded from the front of the hall. My hand closed around the white yew wand in my pocket, as I left behind my friends. On my left, Ernie Macmillan and Bale Wishart were getting ready to face Alice and Jasper. On my right, Penelope Clearwater and Daphne Greengrass were preparing to take on Rosalie and Emmett. I chuckled at the sight of the Slytherin team. They didn't seem impressed by the fact that they'd be facing the strongest and meanest-looking vampire. He, on the other hand, looked ecstatic. On the count of 3, said Martin. I braced myself and took my dueling stance. The Cullens assumed their hunting crouch. 1, 2, 3. Edward and his siblings sprung forwards, roaring as they pushed off the ground. A high-pitched squeal from the right threw my concentration. For one tiny moment, my eyes snapped to Daphne, who looked terrified as a snarling Emmett thundered towards her. When my eyes next landed back on Edward, he was little more than 5 meters away. Protega, I screamed, 90% exhilarated, 10% terrified. Edward slammed into the barrier, his eyes still fixed on me as he stared through the glassy shield. I stumbled back, my mind suddenly going blank. Only when the determined vampire shot around the edge did I remember that I was supposed to avoid being captured. His hand reached out to grab me, lips pulled up into a devilish smile. Quickly, I spun into the pressure, the cheers of the students abruptly replaced by the whooshing dark. My eyes were sucked back into my skull for less than a second, before the empty entrance hall materialized around me. Crisp spring light filtered in through the windows, brightening the area. There was no one there, except for me, or so I thought. Something cold ghosted over my wrist. I whirled with a gasp. 2 vibrant emeralds dominated my vision as I stared up into the captivating mien of my amused vampire, who towered over me like the most enchanting alabaster sculpture. Brilliant light glinted off his flawless teeth, propelling my thoughts into a flurry of girlish fantasies. These constant palpitations could not be good for my health, surely. I win, he purred. My head fell forward, thumping against his hard chest. You caught me. Edward's melodic laughter rang quietly in my ears. Only just. I barely had hold of you when you disapparated. His wintry fingers suddenly clutched at my hips, pressing roughly through my robes, and my breathing swiftly progressed from calm inhalations to excited panting. Still, I win. I'll do better next time. Then I'll have to run faster. I frowned. Why would you do that? Because if I win, I get the prize. But you I shivered as Edward ran his tongue along my lower lip. He didn't seem overly concerned with getting back to work. I gathered that from the way he crushed my body to his, and the feverish movement of his hands as they roamed over my ribs. Ahem. I started and stumbled back, my head whipping in the direction of Professor Martin, who was standing in the doorway of the great hall, his shoe tapping against the floor. Edward looked on unrepentantly. I know you can help yourself, Miss Swan, seeing as you still a teen and therefore ruled by a copious amount of unruly female hormones. My hands clenched into fist, courtesy of aforementioned unruly female hormones. I was seriously thinking about breaking Martin's nose. Your companion, unfortunately, does not share that excuse, he droned, voice monotone and expression bored, and so I will be deducting 10 points from Gryffindor. If you would care to rejoin the others. Martin stepped aside and waved us into the room. Edward somehow managed to hold on to his composure, the rolling of his eyes the only indication of his thoughts. I, on the other hand, was counting to 10. The Cullens sniggered as we entered. Alice even winked at me, before turning away to conceal her low giggle. Emmett wagged his eyebrows at Jasper, who frowned and shook his head. Evidently, activity in the entrance hall hadn't gone unnoticed. We soon got back to work. The vampires, it seemed, decided to make a competition of the lesson. Whoever managed to capture the most students would win the game. Very few witches or wizards managed to escape on their first attempt. I think the sight of a charging vampire made it too hard for them to concentrate. Edward always tried his hardest when I took my turn at evasion. He'd kick off the ground and dive over my blockades, or whip around the edge in his attempt to capture me before I could disapparate. Many times, I'd dematerialize in the entrance hall with the vampire wrapped around me. Whenever that happened, he was never without his satisfied, impish grin. Alice's total was the best in the end, since she always knew when someone was about to cast their shield. She whizzed down the length of the hull like the world's most nimble missile. Good, Martin said with a frown at the end of the lesson. Most of you seem to have gotten the hang of it. His eyes snapped to me. Some, not so much. Bella, do not bad bogey hex your teacher. Do not bad bogey hex your teacher. I would advise you to practice this method as much as possible. So, on the off chance that we are actually attacked, Seamus voiced suddenly, you re-saying this is pretty much all we can do to protect ourselves. Yes. The Irish wizard looked about himself in disbelief, exchanging irritated glances with his friends. There's no offensive maneuver then. With all due respect, Mr. Finnegan, there is a greater chance of me randomly developing an interest in ballet, donning a tutu, and performing the nutcracker for the queen than there is of you defeating a vampire in combat. So not likely then, indeed. Martin crossed his arms and huffed. Over Easter, I would like each of you to complete a 20-inch essay on how to defend oneself against vampires. You should discuss a variety of methods, including scent distortion. The deadline is the first Friday after the holidays. Any questions? The students mumbled amongst themselves, most complaining about the increase in what was already a strenuous workload. The professor's frown deepened. Mr. Cullen, my head instantly snapped to my right, where Edward was lowering his hand. His jaw was clenched and his pupils small. He looked riled, like a man with a vendetta. Forgive me, but, what is scent distortion? I distinctly heard Alice sigh to my left. Professor Martin's eyes narrowed to slits. His lips clenched as he stared down at my vampire fiancé. I am not entirely sure that divulging information on how to escape a vampire to a vampire would be ethical. This is important, insisted Edward. I am sure it is. A heavy silence settled throughout the hall, until the tension was so thick that it could have been sliced with a knife. Edward took a step forwards, towards the platform where the teacher stood. It's pointless to even try, Wyatt. Martin didn't react in the slightest at the mention of his name. His brow was furrowed with concentration, as if he was in the process of solving an extremely difficult math problem. The expression was familiar. I'd seen others wear it when they were trying to keep the mind reader out of their thoughts. A potion, Hermione said suddenly. Edward spun to face the girl, his mouth slightly agape. What? Scent distortion, that's what you want to know, isn't it? It's pretty self-explanatory. There's a specific type of potion that can be used to temporarily alter a human's natural scent. It's only really beneficial though if you trying to throw a hunter of your trail. Edward licked his lips, while a sudden sparkle appeared in his eyes. Professor Martin, meanwhile, had enough. Rather than listen to any further ramblings of his students, he dismissed the class, and quickly departed the scene. The crowd soon dispersed, leaving only the Cullens, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, and me behind. Alice took a careful step towards her brother. You're wrong. Just stop and think about this for a minute, she hissed. You're convinced it's him, that he somehow managed to trick you. He did trick me. Then tell me this: the day you visited the ministry, after supposedly witnessing Saber confronting Truman, how on earth did your suspect find out that he'd have to change his scent? Saber. This was about him. A heavy sigh sounded in my ears. It took me a few seconds to realize that it had been my own. The others turned, and I suddenly found myself the subject of their gazes. Once again, I wasn't sure I agreed that we had the right man, but as always, I was overwhelmed by an unstoppable urge to support Edward, especially now that he was under fire. Maybe someone let slip, I shrugged. Who? Challenged Rosalie. Not McLagan. He was supervised the whole time, from returning from the field, all the way up until the meeting in the Aura department. She turned to Edward then, and said, whether your crazy theory is true or not, we have no way of finding out. That's not necessarily correct, Hermione countered, excited now. What do you mean? Asked a stony-faced Jasper. At the moment, all we want to figure out is whether Iago Cleedon took a scent-distorting potion, right? Right, my friend shrugged. Then the answer is pretty simple, because the potion creates a very distinct smell when ingested. My chest began to rise and fall with increasing speed. My heart banged frantically in my chest as the topic triggered a surge of dark excitement. What smell? I demanded softly, in a voice barely higher than a whisper. One word was all it took to propel the Cullens into a frenzy. One simple word was all it took to fan the spark that had been flickering inside Edward into an inferno of determination. Garlic. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, while the furore exploded around me. EPOV. I knew it'd become him. It were him from the very starting, and no person had listened to me. I was irate. Furious. There was no phrase powerful sufficient to bring how deeply I preferred the dying of that poor excuse for a human being. The insidious low life failed to deserve the air he breathed. Rattling it, Emmett growled. In his thoughts, I may want to listen wave after wave of sparkling ire. He hated the fact that any other human had succeeded in tricking us, especially after the mess with Remilda Vane. Again. First an idiot woman, and now this. Are we positive it's him? Jasper stated cautiously, aware of the flurry of anxiety and anger. My eyes bulged in disbelief, inflicting my brother to again music. Perhaps I have to rephrase. Saber is worried it's a given. However are we able to make sure he's the masquerade attacker? There's only one way to discover, Emmett sneered. His eyes, though excited, have been out of awareness, directed at the massive arched window past the head table at the front of the splendid corridor. As he rubbed his arms collectively with anticipation, he imagined struggling with the traitorous Auror, taking him down like mountain prey. Off to the side, Bella stood huge-eyed, her coronary heart pumping wildly like that of a panicked doe. Beside her, Alice wore a glazed expression, watching the destiny darken into obscurity. I used to be convinced past all doubt that the purpose for her surprising blindness became due to the fact that we would all soon be encountering the identical residence elf that had helped Bella's assailant to escape the fort on Halloween. Residence elves were any other of the many species that blocked my sister's visions. What's the plan? Requested Harry, alert. Did he suppose he'd be becoming a member of IN? Did any of the humans? We ought to be on our protect. If we will get him on his personal even though. You are no longer coming with us, I blurted. A glance of defiance in the end swept the faces of Harry, Ron, and Bella, and that I instantly regretted my outburst. I second that, said Emmett. Bella nearly growled at him, causing a tiny smile to flutter at the edge of his mouth. Sorry, Bells, I concept you of everybody could sympathize. My brother shrugged. It is going to be 7 towards 1. 8, even, if you remember the minister. What would be the point in you coming? It is not as though there be lots which will do. Except, you being there might put Edward on area. Everybody's eyes flashed in my route. I scowled at Emmett, who regarded to discover some enjoyment in my discomfort. Now not that that might be a large trouble, but I do not assume killing the suspect before we've got the chance to impeach him would be the excellent idea. The human beings exchanged glances as they assessed their options. Ron shrugged, accepting defeat. Harry and Bella appeared much less satisfied, and I may want to inform by using their frowns that they both desired to protest. Somehow, I needed to discover a manner to convince the stunning witch to stay behind. I used to be worried that she'd comply with us otherwise. She folded her fingers throughout her chest, quirking an eyebrow at me. The corridor changed into very quiet as I searched for something to mention. Store for my circle of relatives and our closest human allies, it became empty of people. Even the portrait on the front of the room became unoccupied. Dumbledore, as usual, was inside the head's workplace. Please, Bella, I murmured. Live right here. Stay at Hogwarts. Please. For me. No. Bella, how do you anticipate to? I am no longer staying here, Edward, and that's that, she argued. Don't forget what Chiyoko said. The seer. What did she ought to do with something? I felt my brow furrow with confusion. Bella rolled her eyes. She advised me not to spend all my time at Hogwarts. Staying right here isn't going to assist disclose the ministry leaks. We already recognize who one of them is. There may be no purpose why I should not go together with you. Bah, huffed Alice, flinging her hands into the air. She's an old fraud, Bella. Nothing extra. You should pay attention to Edward. My sister's eyes flashed around the group. I assume she anticipated all and sundry to guide her husband particularly. Jasper, pretty, was the handiest one to avoid her gaze. I, like Emmett, kept my face blank. After our meeting with the Sphinx, My brothers, and that I knew that there were some fact inside the seer's predictions, however did that suggest that we definitely had to follow her instructions to the letter. I am with Bella, Jasper proclaimed, his eyes on my fiancée, ensuing in shared smiles of camaraderie. At his phrases, I returned my head and groaned, and Alice's mouth fell open with a pop. She gawked at Jasper like he'd just slapped her around the face. Oh my God, he honestly believes that crap. He does. Whilst Jasper may want to feel his wife's shock and anger, he could not parent the appropriate reason at the back of it. Before he could forestall her, the inky-haired vampire spun on her heels, her hands wrapped tightly round her chest and her shoulders barely hunched as she walked away. "I'll move tell Carlisle and Esme," she stated without a backwards glance. Jasper turned into right now warm on her tail, however he behind schedule grabbing her until they changed into the entrance hall, wherein they could at the least be out of sight. The second his hands closed round her wrist, a new scene blasted into Lifestyle's interior my sister's head. The imaginative and prescient projected itself into my mind like the frames of a movie. I held my breath, hoping for something beneficial, however the premonition grew to become out to be absolutely irrelevant to the greater hassle. Jasper spun his spouse to face him. I winced on the appearance he acquired. Alice and Jasper rarely fought, but after they did, I always feared for the subject of the hyper-demised Pixie's anger, as an alternative him than me. "What is wrong?" "Not anything," growled Alice. "Don't give me that. I am able to always tell. I will experience it." Jasper pointed a finger at her bright, black kitten heels. "On top of that, your Jimmy Choos had been making angry sounds. So that you in professional now on my shoes." Alice fired returned, even though her voice changed into quite softer. Jasper sincerely knew the way to play her. He smirked and nodded. "I have lived with you for long sufficient, Haven T.I. I've evolved the greatest appreciate for your footwear, madam." Alice giggled as Jasper took a step closer to her. "As it's far, I now keep in mind myself fluent in chew." Nuzzling his face into the crook of his spouse's collar, he pulled her frame towards his very own, and finally murmured, "So, tell me, what's got you all labored up?" My sister nervously bit her lip. I assume I am simply annoyed." "Well, of course, you know." Jasper nodded. "I do not know why though." Alice closed her eyes and sighed, before gently resting her head towards her husband's chest. "It frustrates me that I cannot see, in particular when some human claims to recognize the entirety it really is going to take place. I experience completely vain, and it doesn't help that, these days, absolutely everyone appears to agree with the judgment of a not unusual fortune teller over mine." For a second, Jasper paused, his guarded eyes giving not anything away then. Ultimately, he smiled, and pressed his lips to his spouse's ear. "Alice, how normally have you saved us?" He didn't give her time to answer before he continued. "You fundamental to the protection of this own family. We'd have been long gone before now if it hadn't been for you, and that includes Bella. Of root we believe your judgment." "I certainly do, with my life." And similar to that, the vision fizzled out. It always surprised me how a great deal Alice may want to see in the space of 3 seconds. As an awful lot as I hated to admit it, I assume that became the one thing she had in commonplace with Arrow she noticed so much in this kind of short area of time. Jasper spun his wife to stand him. Hostility did now not fill her eyes as it had in the vision, wonder had changed it. Like a speeding bullet, Alice released herself on the empath. "Wah, oh, Jazz, you usually know exactly what to mention." But Alice without delay smothered his words with a passionate kiss. Jasper blinked in surprise. When his tiny lover sooner or later returned, he shook his head and grinned. "I will by no means apprehend you, lady." "Beside me," Rosalie coughed. "Ahem, are we able to get again to the problem to hand, please?" The people looked around confusedly. They hadn't heard the trade in the front hall, so that they didn't recognize Rosalie's impatience. "We're going to meet you within the workplace," Alice proclaimed, poking her head around the nook. "Jazz and I will pass quick father and mother." After they had left, I warily glanced at Bella. Infection glinted in her eyes as she returned my stare. I felt the familiar sensation of being pulled into her mind as her defend evaporated. "You mad in case you assume you can maintain me out of this." I sighed. "First rate." Just as I was approximately to open my mouth to argue, a first-rate flash of lovely, silvery mild shot round the brink of the door into the superb corridor. The feline Patronus turned into right away recognizable. I had visible it before. It pounced fluidly through the air, preventing best whilst it was immediately placed before the eyes of Ron and Ginny. "Your mother is looking ahead to you in my workplace," stated the voice of Minerva McGonagall. "Please come right away. The password is Pride of Portree." The sparkling cat disintegrated, leaving behind nothing however a torrent of bewilderment. Ron shared a fearful glance together with his sister, and then with Bella. She changed into very close with the Weasley family, because of her friendship with Fred and George, who had invited her to their domestic in the course of the summers of her early life. She cared strongly for Mrs. Weasley, which became probably why she ended up running after the others at complete pelt, leaving me behind with Emmett and Rosalie. A part of me desired to chase after her, however I hesitated. Mrs. Weasley's mind had been forged into chaos. Her head was a maelstrom of grief, confusion, and utter melancholy. Through McGonagall's eyes, I saw the lady slumped in a chair in opposition to the headmistress' ornate table. Her eyes have been ringed with dark shadows, and her cheekbones stuck out at sharp angles, as if her flesh have been stretched too tightly over the bone. No semblance of coloration tinted her pores and skin. Even her hair had misplaced its vibrancy, now rooted with wisps of gray. The witch had lost her effervescence. It had been sapped away by means of prolonged adversity, a lot so that she appeared in danger of becoming something much less than human, a shadow of her former self, a mere wraith. Emmett threw me an expectant look, but I wasn't approximately to explain Mr. Weasley's catch-22 situation. It wasn't my location for one element, and secondly, I did not have time to waste. Here became the perfect possibility, and I supposed to apply it. BPOV. My muscle tissue burned as I driven myself to preserve running. The flight up the grand staircase from the bottom to the uppermost tiers had truly worn me out. Nevertheless, I endured on, ignoring the fire in my protesting limbs. Ultimately, we pulled to a prevent earlier than the office defend. I had to grip my knees even as my exhausted lungs captured sufficient oxygen. When Ron resentfully wheezed out the password, searching as if he'd been force-fed something in particular disgusting like a mold-flavored Bertie Bott's bean, I snorted on reflex. Pleasure of Portree. Sincerely, I could not say that I was inspired with the headmistress Quidditch group of choice. However, I think it wasn't this type of surprise that a woman with Scottish ancestry would lend her aid to a Scottish team. Still, I minded. Mrs. Weasley seemed to spoil when we barreled into the workplace. Ginny changed into the primary to run to the crying witch, and become observed rapidly by Hermione and myself. Ron patted his mom at the shoulder, while Harry stood a cautious distance, sporting a frown formed of each sympathy and problem. Professor McGonagall, meanwhile, looked slightly disgruntled, her hard green eyes flashing with disapproval as they moved over Harry, Hermione and me. I all of a sudden remembered that we hadn't been invited. "What is incorrect, Mum?" asked Ginny. Mrs. Weasley sobbed in opposition to her shoulder, before retreating barely to blow her nose right into a lilac handkerchief. "It is why your father," she wept. Final night he left the house, but he failed to come home. He has now not been right for a long time. It's all this hassle at the ministry. He cannot take it anymore. I barely registered the reality that I used to be gnawing at my decreased lip. I pressured myself to prevent once I stuck the faint heady scent of blood. In my nervousness, I would grazed my teeth over the sensitive skin a lot that they felt uncooked. Not top-notch when you spend half of some time making out with a vampire. Collectively, my human friends and I stood in silence. No person knew precisely what to mention, but the ecosystem hummed with our quiet alarm. Hermione shuffled uncomfortably, and reached out to entwine her hands with Ron's. His jaw was tight, and the pulse above his temple changed into visible as it throbbed with the pressure of his anger. He did not blame his father, he changed into just annoyed via the situation in popular. Just like the rest of us, he was fully conscious that the Death Eaters were the basis of every horrific factor that had happened to his family over the course of the beyond year. "Professor," he said, maintaining a relaxed facade, "can also I have permission to go away the faculty?" The headmistress responded with a short nod. "Because it so takes place, I was about to suggest that you and your sister return to the burrow together with your mom. if your father continues to be within the place, we can locate him faster with more human beings within the Sikh party. Sure, I too will help the hunt. McGonagall's assertion turned into met by using a relieved sniffle from the sobbing Mrs. Weasley. She had a point, the more the better, and, truly, what else turned into I going to do? As a whole lot as I desired to sign up for the Cullens in beating Saber, the garlic-reeking fraud, to a bloody pulp, I knew in my coronary heart that they did not need my assist to take him down. 7 vampires against 1 unsuspecting wizard changed into a positive issue. He did not stand a chance. The Weasleys, alternatively, wanted all the assist they might get. My hand fell far away from Molly's shoulder as I took a step towards the headmistress, determinedly squaring myself. She quirked an eyebrow at me as I held her sober gaze. "Omit Swan. I am coming too." I hadn't predicted her to supply instantaneous permission, being the stickler for policy and regulation that she generally became. On this occasion, however, her mouth twitched on the corners, and he or she nodded her assent. Of route, Harry and Hermione accompanied my lead, in addition pledging to aid the look for the lacking Arthur Weasley. "Don't look so astounded, Omit Swan," McGonagall quipped once I continued to gaze at her with an amazed countenance. "You're in person, are you not? You may do as you please, and that I haven't any interest in denying you depart of Hogwarts whilst your intentions suit my own." She rolled her eyes at me and shook her head. That might be counter-efficient. The witch seemed absolutely unperturbed while the door to her workplace all of a sudden swung open, the images rattling in opposition to the partitions as a parade of instructors made their way over the threshold. Madame Hooch led the way, garbed in a billowing emerald cape, her hawk-like eyes twinkling with anticipation in the back of a pair of huge obvious goggles. Like many of the others, she proudly gripped her broom, awaiting McGonagall's command. "Excellent, you all here." "Sybil." "Yes, Minerva," replied the neurotic divinations instructor. "I would really like it if you will stay at the back with Firenze. We can go away the citadel unmanned, no matter the current state of affairs." "Of course, headmistress. The relaxation of you may accompany me to the Burrow. Together, we are able to scour Ottery Street, Catchpole and the surrounding area for strains of Mr. Weasley. If any of you discover a probable clue at some stage in the hunt, ship up a flare to inform the rest of us of your whereabouts. Now, keep in mind that there may be Muggle citizens close by. Hold low to avoid being visible. The remaining element we want proper now is unnecessary attention." A mixture of hysteria and anticipation hung within the atmosphere as the alert workforce absorbed Professor McGonagall's strict instructions. Authority rang in her every phrase, and it became seen in her strong posture and the cussed set of her jaw. She sincerely become an enforcing female. "Any questions?" she stated ultimately. The academics all shook their heads. Almost each member of body of workers in Hogwarts a point changed into there at the equipped Professor Fulplume stood beside the intense defense instructor, Professor Martin. The latter held a brush, however I already knew that the transfiguration instructor failed to need such contraptions to assist her in taking to the skies. Hagrid stood to their left, maintaining the leash to his slobbering bloodhound, Fang, who sat panting at the ground, showering it with spittle, plenty to the distaste of a scowling Phineas Nigellus. Also present have been Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, Professor Babbling of Historic Runes, Professor Sinstra of Astronomy, Professor Slughorn, and Professor Vector of Arithmancy. I wasn't clearly surprised that McGonagall was willing to visit such lengths to discover Weasley. As a member of the Order of the Phoenix, he had validated the utmost loyalty to the warfare in opposition to dark wizards. That, mixed with his sturdy compassion for Muggles, had certainly earned him the honor of those witches and wizards who had rejected Voldemort's abominable imaginative and prescient vision that could have plunged participants of the non-magical community into slavery if the tyrant survived long enough to put in force it. And so, with a functional solve, the occupants of the room moved towards the headmistress' fireplace, forming an orderly queue as every awaited their flip to step into the flow. Mrs. Weasley appeared barely more hopeful as her watery eyes scanned the road of humans that had come to assist her own family. I, in the meantime, decided to ship a message to my vampire fiancé, however I had a hunch that dropping my defend to accomplish that might be of little need in any way. He hadn't accompanied me and my buddies as much as the office, and if I knew Edward, he could have taken the distraction furnished by way of the modern crisis to get away the castle without me. What if I am incorrect? I notion unexpectedly, What if something occurs to him at some stage in his assignment? The first sparks of panic flashed to lifestyles within me, and my heartbeat swiftly multiplied. Bella, probed Hermione as I hesitated in front of the fireplace. Harry had simply disappeared earlier than my eyes, swallowed through the inexperienced flames. I was next in line, however, found myself unexpectedly stepping aside, earlier than I turning to stand my friend, who become looking at me together with her eyebrows raised. There's something I want to do first. You cross on ahead. I'll join you as quickly as I will. And with that, I hurtled from the workplace, leaving the others in the back to splutter their protests. It didn't take me long to attain my dormitory. Rays of buttery sunshine filtered in through the window, glinting off the tool placed on my bedside desk. I marched toward the spying replicate and right now snatched it up. I was presupposed to deliver it with me wherever I went. However, Edward and I had been collectively so often at some stage in term time that it become best truly beneficial at night time, at which time I was compelled to retreat to my dormitory, a place that turned into strictly off limits to the adult males. In Forks, Edward had grown so used to watching me sleep that regardless of his knowledge and recognition of the policies, he constantly harbored a robust resentment for them. The undercover agent band, therefore, supplied an almost perfect technique to that problem. Engorgio, I said, pointing my wand at the reflect. The little, silver tool increased instantly in my palm. After tucking the wand again into my pocket, I gripped the reflect with each fingers and stared into the glass. Edward. It changed into only a second before I received a reaction. Edward's face quick came into view as he opened the spy band. Bella, are you all right? He wondered in a rush, alarmed by using my name. I smiled and nodded, pleased while the panic drained from his countenance. I am Shirley Quality. I simply desired to permit you to know that I am going to the burrow to assist the others search for Mr. Weasley. Edward nodded. Alice stated as lots. We on the ministry. We've stuffed the minister in. He and Brone are coming with us to accost Saber. We're pretty much to go off. Well, in case you need whatever, let me recognize, okay? At my phrases, a tender smile crept onto the vampire's face. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed Emmett, who was moving impatiently from foot to foot. Bro, can we pass already? I am dying for a few action. One way or the other. I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes. Ill so long, I said fast. Be cautious. And also you, nodded Edward. In a rush, he told me he cherished me, to which I replied the identical, after which the discourse got here to a near as he flipped the metal cowl closed, leaving me with the picture of my very own reflection. After shrinking it lower back to its everyday size, I slipped the mirror into my pocket, and sped away, out of the dormitory. My adventure lower back to McGonagall's office changed into interrupted through Viola and Amicus, who apprehended me inside the commonplace room, determined to proportion their tale of a prank that they had currently pulled on a snotty fifth-year Slytherin. It become with first-rate regret that I knowledgeable them the valiant account could must wait. That, of direction, straight away put them on complete alert. What form of Gryffindor would skip up the possibility to listen to one of these story? There should be a few problem, Amicus advised Viola as they observed me up the staircase. What's up, Bella? Nothing that worries you, I answered defensively, no longer trying to involve my younger crew associates. Despite my efforts, they observed me all of the way as much as the 7th ground, preventing handiest when they realized my affairs could take me past the stone gargoyle guarding McGonagall's office. I breathed a sigh of comfort as I left them at the back happy that I hadn't been forced to apply magic towards my buddies. The workplace was empty of human beings after I entered the second time. They had all vanished into the flow, and might already be taking off their look for Mr. Weasley. Without a second's hesitation, I reached for the golden pot placed at the all-right-mantelpiece, which held the emerald powder. The workplace and all its glinting devices gotten smaller from view as I was all at once catapulted backwards into the rainbow vortex. It failed to take lengthy to reach the Weasley's domestic. I arrived in a count number of seconds, and stumbled out into a deserted residing room, barely disoriented and blanketed from head to toe in soot. I could even taste it on my tongue, and felt it in the back of my throat. Below the dirty flavor become a metallic sharpness. I coughed in and try and clean my airlines, earlier than the usage of my wand to siphon off the soot smearing my face. Guess I used too much, I stated to no one in particular. The room, as continually, changed into shabby, however the tatty old furniture was perfectly complemented by way of Mrs. Weasley's eclectic style and love of warm colorations. The obvious coziness elevated my reluctance to depart, and as a result of chronic lingering, I used to be hit with a surge of excellent reminiscences. There inside the Weasley circle of relatives' home, my recollections of the twins have been clearer than ever. On one of the couch's arms turned into a patch of scorched material wherein Percy had accidentally knocked over an oil lamp after lunging at Fred and George. Back when Wizard Wheezes become only a dream, the twins had spent the length of the summer holidays the use of their unwilling brother as a guinea pig for diverse inventions. Unbeknownst to Percy, they sneakily placed a magically camouflaged whoopee cushion on his preferred chair, so whilst the unsuspecting wizard finally sat down, the room echoed with the disgusting sound of an amplified fart. Regrettably for Percy, his urchin brothers have been very, very thorough, and had coated the insides of the cushion with dung powder. After turning an unpleasant shade of percent, their embarrassed sufferer pounced throughout the room with the goal of throttling the gruesome twosome. Mrs. Weasley eventually banished her sons to their lair, where we spent the next 2 hour rolling on the ground, howling like a page C of wolves. The old grandfather clock quick put an end to reminiscence. Its arms furnished an astringent reminder of the cutting-edge disaster. Electricity buckled in my thighs as I turned and bolted for the door. I slightly made it over the threshold earlier than the lioness ripped her way to the floor, excited by using the herbal instinct to protect. I could best desire that Mr. Weasley's hand would not be pointing to misplaced for long. Lioness paw, scents anywhere. So many lush, smooth, putrid and candy. Breathed in and there it become clean grass, river water, pollen, algae, moss and flesh. Mouth-watering flesh, bloody, alive. In the sky, a long manner off, human beings were flying like massive tasty birds. Gorge changed into amongst them. Ought to see every element of his face, one of the perks of animal imaginative and prescient. Hagrid changed into trudging north with Fang. Wouldn't it be wrong to consume canine cat's herbal enemy? Honestly no longer. My insides grumbled loudly. Yes, I know. Hungry and grumpy. I padded over to a nearby shed and gave the door an excellent sniff, then licked it for properly degree. Oh, flavors with the hint of character. Like a pleasant wine. Nudged the door with my forehead, but it would not budge. Seemed down at my paws, and resented the reality that I didn't have thumbs. Irritated now, crashed in opposition to the brittle wooden. Turns out brittle wooden and rusty hinges don't like 400 kilos really worth of large cat. The door flew open to more scents. Acrid smells assaulted my senses, chemicals, metallic and wooden. Under that became something tons sweeter, the identical odor from the door. Sharper although preserved by means of the shelter of the shed, shielded from weathering. Mr. Weasley. I liked the way he smelt. Surely preferred it. He was anywhere on each gadget and every floor. Licking my lips, I grew to become lower back to the door. Locate Mr. Weasley. Mustn't eat him even though he does smell tasty. Save him. Yes. Picked up a trail no longer some distance beyond the front gate. Faint, but impossible to doubt. Observed it for a minute or so, just to make sure I had the right course, then burst north in the direction of the woods, through wild grasses, pouncing over nettles. Quicker and faster I went, gaining velocity each 2D, cooling wind whipping at my face, my limbs, my heaving body. Fang yelped as I overtook, and Hagrid jumped. Blimey, Bella, tryin' to present me a coronary heart assault. His voice got smaller as I surged on in advance. In all likelihood a great thing he couldn't maintain up. I intimidate Fang. Stopped all at once at the wooded area. Cautiously scanned the vicinity for symptoms of threat, but most effective caught sight of wriggling bugs, cautious birds and hopping mammals. Pondered eating a squirrel at one factor, however determined against it. Tree rats possibly do not make proper meals. The odor from before become nonetheless present. Mr. Weasley have been right here. May want to find no motive to prevent my hunt, and so I persevered on, cautious of sharp branches and underbrush, but nonetheless maintaining to a productive pace approximately 15 miles in step with hour. Could have carried out double that, however failed to need to burn myself out. Stopped via a shallow pond for a drink after 7 miles. I might been going for walks for an hour, and my mouth changed into like a sauna, warm and dry. Aside from that, felt pretty good. Better than proper. Alive. Sturdy. Exhilarated. Once or twice, I thought I heard Edward's voice. In reality, I used to be sure of it. Wasn't sure what that supposed, however preferred it. My tail swung from side to side. Sure, like his voice. Pleasant. Listened to it at the same time as I drank. The pond water turned into stagnant, however cool. Invigorating even. Made me need to press on. Bounded eagerly from the financial institution, returned to the path, geared up to hunt again. All of a surprising, I inhaled something cute. A roar ripped from my chest as I rushed forwards, excited with the aid of the scent. Blood. Delicious, tempting blood. My stomach, my first-rate rumbling belly became empty. Needed meat. May want to odor meat. Fascinated with me. Flew like lightning through the woodland, wild and crazed. For 1 second, the human in me rushed to the forefront of my mind. I felt my intelligence go back with full force, not long enough to permit a go-back transformation of path, but I without a doubt remembered that it would be inexcusable to consume Mr. Weasley. He changed into not filet mignon, and I was not a murderer. I was a witch on a project, a task to find the daddy of loved buddies. People have been depending on me. If I lost it, but that wasn't worth thinking about. The lioness took the front seat yet again, with the renewed preference to find and rescue. Stopped at the foot of a craggy incline finishing up via the timber. Noticed a purple stain on the sharp edge of a huge slab a few featuring up. Bent my head to inhale. Really, Mr. Weasley. He need to have tripped. Studied the rocky slope some seconds longer. Why bother? 7 miles from home and nonetheless going. But going wherein? Pushed off the ground, muscle groups propelling me higher and higher. 3 things had me strolling quicker than ever: vexation, now not understanding does that concern for Mr. Weasley, and impatience for dinner. Needed to find him. Had to discover him soon. That or starve. 15 miles in line with hour to 20, 20 miles according to hour to 25, then 30. Scents in my nostril, main the manor, roots of timber disappearing below me, bushes passing by way of in a blur. Faster and faster, mile after mile. Couldn't tell how far I would long past when the heady scent exploded, ripping through my head. The whole lot came into sharper recognition. Scents. Attractions. Sounds. Should listen, my very own heartbeat, pulsing. Thudding. A quarry. Dusty. Hazardous. My senses told me that Mr. Weasley become close by. The fragrance become clean. He'd been right here some time. Hairs on stop. I edged deeper into the pit, past boulders and a steep cliff face. Seemed beforehand, and saw limbs. Bite toys. No, limbs. I ought to hear respiratory. He changed into alive. BPOV. Alerted by way of my find, I jumped again into human form. Mr. Weasley turned into flailed out at the floor like a rag doll, his legs poking out from in the back of a dusty mound. I sprinted forwards as speedy as my limited human muscle tissues ought to convey me, throwing myself to the floor upon attaining the subconscious wizard. After wearing out a quick inventory, I surmised that Mr. Weasley would be high quality as soon as he'd had a drink and a terrific meal. His knee become bloody from in which he'd bashed it at the rocks, and via the looks of his lips, I guessed that he was slightly dehydrated. Apart from a few superficial scrapes, there has been not anything else wrong with him. Quickly extracting my wand, I conjured a goblet and scooped fresh water from the close by circulate. At the same time as helping Mr. Weasley's head, I carefully poured the liquid into his mouth. Mr. Weasley, I said lightly. Can you pay attention me? It's Bella, Mr. Weasley. Whilst seconds had passed and I'd obtained no reaction, I swiftly pointed my wand up towards the sky. A violent purple flare burst into the air, leaving an irritated scar towards the blue. Optimistically, someone would see it and alert the others. Now that I knew Mr. Weasley became safe, I sank into quiet mirrored image. What on this planet may want to motivate an ostensibly practical man to leave his own family without warning to trek into the barren region with only a small deliver of food and a cell phone? After looking the backpack which had been carelessly tossed to at least one side, I realized that Mr. Weasley had left home with no goal of a quick return. No one wanders away with extra than 5 tins of beans and a loaf of bread in the event that they plan on being lower back before dusk, and so I needed to marvel, what may want to in all likelihood motivate such an excursion? Bella. The backpack slipped from my fingers, and I spun. Certain sufficient, the person turned into sitting, his bloodshot eyes aimed at my face. Sir. The wizard scanned his environment. He nearly appeared amazed to be there. Finally, his eyes observed mine once more. Something approximately the manner he stared at me made me uncomfortable, inflicting me to ward off my gaze. Mr. Weasley's hand twitched toward his cell. I suppressed a snicker. Possibly he changed into afraid that he misplaced it, however, surely, who precisely would a wizard call? Telecommunications weren't precisely big inside the magical global. What are you doing here? He demanded. I flinched at the anger in his voice. You shouldn't be here. Get away, he cried, springing to his feet. Instinctively, I stumbled again. The person appeared crazed. His eyes have been wild, and his mouth become twisted into a furious snarl. Without some other word, he bent down to seize up his silver flip smartphone, handling it in what could only be defined as a loving, possessive manner. The wizard all of a sudden turned far from me, his attention now riveted to the smartphone. I, in the meantime, nervously gripped my wand. While he endured to caress the small, rectangular buttons, I took the possibility to survey the place in more element. I used to be status in a slim alley shaped with the aid of two opposing cliff faces. A circulation barely extra than a trickle of water ran without delay alongside the center. A bit in addition beforehand, the direction become interrupted with the aid of a collection of boulders and shattered rock. Even though I had never been here before, my nerves prickled with sudden attention. This is where Harry and Ron have been both injured, is not it? I realized aloud. I turned again to face Mr. Weasley, who stared again at me with useless eyes. Yes. After which he lifted his wand. A throbbing pain between my eyes was the final issue I felt earlier than I blacked out. EPOV. I fastened the clasp of the spy band with a slight feel of alleviation. Bella was fending off to the burrow to look for Mr. Weasley. Although I would not be wholly unsurprised if she returned from her seek with a few scrapes and bruises, I couldn't see her moving into a whole lot trouble inside the British geographical region, far from the danger of loss of life eaters. Are you ready now? Emmett whined, like an impatient little one. I need some violence, Edward, earlier than I die of boredom. Very well, I snapped. I am prepared. Clean, tiger, Brone stated kind of. I turned to face the Auror, who became status alongside the minister. The primary become garbed in dark gowns and black leather boots, while the latter indicated a choice for a good deal brighter colors. Kingsley wore robes of royal red, mixed with clever footwear of the finest brown leather based, and an emerald cape. Alice eyed his ensemble with a glance of slight inflammation. As a long way as my sister changed into concerned, Muggle couture changed into some distance superior to the fashion of witches and wizards, though she reserved a unique place in her heart for the spider silk dress that had included the mystical tent we purchased at Cotton and Tweed. In her mind, I watched her vision drift out of focus as a surprising photograph flared to existence. It best lasted for a second or so, but it introduced a grin to my face nevertheless. Bella's just morphed, my sister cheerfully introduced. She's approximately to find a trail that allows you to lead her to Mr. Weasley. He's 16 miles from the burrow. She have to discover him in 4 hours. Emmett chuckled and nudged me in the ribs. A right little hunter she's turning out to be, Edward. They agreed with him, had it no longer been for the scowl that overtook Brone's countenance. Regardless of the slow-mounting gratitude he felt for my family, a product of new revelations, he still despised the idea of a human suffering the bite of a vampire, irrespective of the motive. His eyes met mine, and even though I couldn't read his mind, his distaste was obvious nonetheless. He forced himself not to mention something that need to have taken a few effort, thinking about the strength of his ideals. Bella Swan is a superb girl, the minister nodded, pulling me lower back to the existing communication. The following smile that unfolded across his face was so warm and honest that it brought about a natural burst of delight, one which possessed all ferocity and depth of a steaming hot geyser. In every admire, certainly, as plenty as there was to say approximately my fiancé, there has been additionally the urgent difficulty of the traitorous ministry worker. Iago Cleedon, additionally known as Saber through his colleagues, became not because of end paintings until 5 o'clock. It become presently 3 o'clock, which left us a terrific 2 hours to subdue his house elf, who we suspected would be looking forward to him at home. Because it changed into no longer possible to apparate inside and out of the ministry, thanks to security motives, first we used the minister's private fireplace, which become handiest used under pressing instances, leaving the wonderful workplace at the back of and touring by the flow network to Brown's London rental. From what I noticed of it, it became very small, easy, and completely unembellished. We did not linger there, instead apparating immediately to our intended destination. We materialized on a long country lane, which wound upwards into dense wooded area, earlier than in the end disappearing out of sight. Half of way up the street, set against the inexperienced hillside, become an vintage Victorian house built of blackened stone and blue slate. Wiry vines with blood-pink leaves blanketed the front, a few had even reached the roof, seeming to strangle the chimney. All in all, it changed into a totally sinister constructing. We concealed in the bushes while my family and that I listened for symptoms of existence. The people waited in whole silence for the signal, trusting our judgment. Other than a peculiar humming and a quick, repetitive thudding sound, which I took to be the mind and heartbeat of Saber's residence elf, there has been not anything to signify a probable risk. I nodded to Kingsley, who in the end observed me and my own family out into the open, Brown not far in the back of him. The elf is on the floor, I mouthed to them. Behind the house. Collectively, we slinked across the facet till we reached the returned porch. The garden was ruled by way of an large willow tree. The grass changed into untamed, and weeds had been creeping up through the cracks inside the root. Carefully, so as to avoid detection, the minister crept closer to the open bay window. Gentle buzzing might be heard from interior by the sounds of it. The elf turned into female. She were preparing dinner for the grasp, for the heady scent of red meat, vegetables, and Yorkshire puddings wafted out into the open air. Rhubarb collapse and custard observed it. My nose wrinkled with disgust. To a human, I am positive the meal might have smelled divine. Kingsley and Brown were nearly salivating via the window, hypnotized by using the odor. Every other aroma poured out into the outdoor, and right away I used to be inflexible. I needed to press my fists towards my aspects to preserve myself from punching a hollow through the stone wall. The house elf's fragrance showed our suspicions. It changed into the same one I would encountered on Halloween, the identical one that had helped Bella's assailant to get away. We have been right, I hissed softly via clenched teeth. With grim resignation, Brown nodded in acknowledgement. His eyes flicked upwards and his frame tensed then, like a striking cobra, he pounced from his crouched position below the window. Stupefy. There has been a sudden dull thud and the harsh sound of shattering china. When I rose to my fort, I saw the unconscious residence elf slumped towards a rosewood counter, surrounded via the fragments of broken crockery, her arms dangling limply via her aspects. Fine, stated Kingsley, who proceeded to permit himself in through the returned door. Brown grunted in solution, earlier than following him internal. To begin with, I would thought that I might loathe Saber's associate, but I realized that wasn't the case as quickly as I noticed the big blue shiner she'd obtained to her left eye. Her rags were smooth for the maximum component, store for some cooking stains, however the rest of her appearance screamed forget and abuse. She was as thin as a rake, and covered from head to toe with bruises. Carlyle's being concerned instincts kicked in straight away. He dashed forwards to scoop up the feeble creature, before laying her cautiously at the counter pinnacle. What's going to appear to her? Rosalie seethed. Abuse, regardless of what the species, continually affected her in the most violent manner. She'll be taken to St. Mungo's to recover. After Saber is charged, he'll routinely forfeit the proper to an elf, said Brown. So she may not be able to assist him escape. No. The orders of an elf's grasp are of the very best regulation, but Saber's authority will ruin the moment we charge him. After what he has completed to her, I doubt his elf will need to assist him, however although she does, it'll be out of her power to accomplish that. Appropriate, I concept, he merits to rot. We quickly agreed that Kingsley could take Carlyle and the elf to St. Mungo's by means of facet alongside apparition. Esme decided to go them, leaving the rest folks in the back to anticipate the villain's arrival. We stood in silence even as we waited for the minister to return. The kitchen changed into spacious, and notwithstanding the large windows, via which streamed strong rays of light, the teal Baroque wallpaper, coupled with the wealthy tones of the wood counters, darkened the distance extensively. Kingsley arrived simply as I was examining an oil portrait of an incredible Siberian tiger, with eyes burning brightly inside the wooded area of the night. We must wait outdoor, said Jasper. We do not need to be right here whilst Saber gets again. Following my brother's notion, it turned into unanimously agreed that we must retreat to the safe haven of the bushes. No matter Alice's visions, none folks had been inclined to remain in the house at the extraordinary hazard that Saber might capture us by way of wonder. It had to be the other manner around. The people reduced themselves to the floor. Thankfully, the earth was dry. Brone had little to say, however the minister became especially cheerful and inquisitive. He chatted with Emmett and Jasper approximately Quidditch, and inquired after the girls' plans for the summer. Propped in opposition to the trunk of a huge ash, I flipped open the secret agent band's cowl. With Bella in her animal shape, I hadn't expected that I might be capable of see whatever once more, I might been incorrect. I had a view of a mossy woodland. One at a time, the timber whizzed with the aid of, as did the fauna mice and hedgehogs cowering in their nests. Implausible, Jasper murmured, peeping over my shoulder. Is that Bella? I nodded. She merged with the reflect. It's like I am seeing everything through her eyes. For as soon as, chuckled Alice, who smiled appreciatively at the view. That lady is severely exceptional. Astounding, Kingsley agreed, further peering into the reflect. You realize, Edward, your female friend has a chunk of a representative. The infamous Bella Swan. I am aware of it, I assure you. I watched with rapt interest as one scene after some other opened up itself like complicated origami within the minister's creativeness. Technically, I should not condone awful behavior, but when it's in protest of Dolores Umbridge, who can argue? Right here, stated Brone, after shuddering at the mere point out of the merciless witch's call. Continually enjoyed listening to approximately her antics with the Weasleys back within the day. Fudge tried to hush it up. I interrupted the orer, but the memories always managed to make their manner along the grapevine regardless. Now not surprising when you do not forget what number of ministry employees have relatives at Hogwarts. It really is proper, said Kingsley, and there wasn't a first-rate witcher wizard amongst us who wasn't cheering them on. He gave Brone a brief nudge then, and stated, bear in mind the time they snuck into Umbridge's office and filled all her panties with baby blast-ended scroots. A chorus of snorts and guffaws have been the result of the minister's question. Brone, on the other hand, issued a faux gag. Please do no longer point out panties and Umbridge in the same sentence. I had fish pie for dinner, Kingsley. Do not blame me whilst it ends up to your lap. After a while, but, even the austere wizard couldn't maintain returned a grin. That silly bat, she did not even test her knickers before she placed them on. Deserved everything she got, as some distance as I am concerned. Kingsley barked out a laugh. Is that something you do regularly? Take a look at your undies? Perhaps no longer earlier than that, however ever considering the fact that saves me a burnt ass and a nip to the privates. After every other hearty snicker, Kingsley grew to become far from his friend and returned to me alternatively. It's in all likelihood an amazing component you plan on making and sincere girl of Bella Swan. Absolutely, I think most human guys are too frightened of her. That become how the verbal exchange went for the following hours, Kingsley encouraging light chit-chat in and try and ease the anxiety. At precisely region past 5, but, the bubble burst with a literal pop. I shot forth into my hunting crouch with my siblings, my enamel bared for a fight. The abruptness of our primal behavior furnished sufficient warning for the wizards, who had been without delay on their guard, thrust into similar states of alertness, their vigilant eyes forged inside the course of the house. Through the back window, I watched Saber saunter into the kitchen. All of a sudden, he stopped useless and the boastful smile he wore dropped from his face. Rattling it, Tinka. I thought I told you to have dinner prepared by the point I were given lower back. Ull suppose she'd learn after the ultimate time. He stomped over to the range, in which the greens endured to soak. To save you the water from bubbling over, or the house from burning to the floor, Alice had eliminated the warmth after Brone stunned the house elf, and Jasper had removed the shards of broken china to save you Saber's immediate wariness. The dark wizard endured to rave and curse. We had to do it now, or Tinka's absence could begin to cause suspicion. Earlier than Saber had time to react, I used to be crashing against him. The kitchen door collided with the wall, smashed off its hinges. With loud, vicious snarls, my brothers and sisters observed my lead, and in less than a 2D the wizard changed into completely surrounded, pinned towards the wall via the neck, my teeth an inch from his face. While he moved to grab his wand from his pocket, my arms curled around his wrist, and that I squeezed till his bones snapped. I felt no remorse at the sound of his soreness. Determined screams stuffed the room as his weapon dropped to the floor. I kicked it away, and Kingsley shot forwards to choose it up. "Don T trouble calling in your elf," I sneered. "She's unconscious." The veins beneath the wizard's pores and skin bulged as I increased the stress on his neck, my hand contracting like a vice. The more asphyxiated he have become, the more his eyes watered. "Your face is all crimson, Saber. Let us have a look at how lengthy it takes in order to flip pink." 1, 3, Edward, Alice interrupted. In my head, I endured to count. "As a lot as I am enjoying watching you torture Mr. Cleedon, Don T, you suspect we must get down to commercial enterprise. He might not be able to inform us in which to locate the loss of life eaters if he passes out." "She does have a point," Emmett concurred. Their good judgment changed into fair, but that failed to lessen my resentment, and so it was with reluctance that I loosened my grip on Saber's windpipe. He gasped because the air rushed into his lungs, and persevered to achieve this until his skin lowered back to a more natural coloration. "No trace of garlic now," Rosalie smirked, turning to her husband. "Told you there has been no such issue as man smell." Certain enough, without the fragrance-distorting potion he had used to pollute his regular aroma, Bella's attacker had regained a more natural fragrance. His cinnamon-heady scent changed into an precise match to that of the Halloween attacker. Whilst Jasper confident the minister of this, he extracted a vial from his pocket, unstopped it, and moved forwards to pour it down our captive's throat. Saber attempted to face up to the Veritaserum, however quickly complied once I gave his broken wrist a very good shake. "First off, inform us how lengthy you have been a loss of life eaters," Kingsley ordered. Saber answered with mechanical stiffness, his voice locked in monotone. "I have become a loss of life eater whilst Pious Thickness became the Minister for Magic." "Bah," spat Brone. "No wonder we had no success finding them during the war. He has been feeding them intel for over 12 months. "It wouldn't be the first time," Kingsley stated ominously. "We understand from Karkaroff that Rookwood passed facts to Voldemort when he labored for the branch of mysteries at some stage in the primary battle. It truly is how they knew approximately the prophecy." "Indeed, and it looks like the Auror office turned into their subsequent precedents, isn't always that proper, Saber?" "Sure," the wizard spoke back with dead eyes. "So what? What changed into the overall purpose, The goal become to take manipulate of the department. After the death of the Darkish Lord, I wasn't stupid sufficient to alternate in a job on the ministry for a life as a fugitive. It became out of loyalty that I agreed to maintain passing information as an undercover agent. I intended to take in the function of head Auror as quickly because the job become presented to me. Which is why you attempted to make Alpheus Truman appear like a blithering fool," the Irish wizard accused, "because you desired to convince the minister that your rival wasn't suit for the job." "Yes, bringing the Auror office beneath loss of life eater manage ought to only prove wonderful to our protection. God, I hated this guy. Correct witches had wizards were slaughtered because he'd been depraved enough to tell his evil pals of forthcoming Auror assaults. How I controlled now not to kill him, I am able to in no way recognize. In which are the Demise Eaters now?" I demanded. "The present-day headquarters of the Dying Eaters is a subterranean chamber beneath Winchester Cathedral. Rookwood positioned the imperious curse on the bishop, who then closed the crypt off to the general public." Silence met the contemporary admission. My revulsion at this cutting-edge admission became overpowering. It hit me like a punch to the gut, and judging by the sight of Jasper, who seemed like he'd just been provided a rotten egg for dinner, that feeling became shared by anybody. "A crypt," snapped an incredulous Rosalie. "That is simply ill." "Agreed," said Brone. "No friggin' admire. I am significantly going to revel in locking you up, Cleedon." Kingsley nodded. "Certainly, but earlier than we do that, I've one greater question." This was the instant I'd been awaiting. Like simmering acid, the anticipation was eating away at me. "Who else is operating for the Demise Eaters? We already recognize that there are at least of you." Saber succeeded in retaining the minister's extreme stare, however his anxiety became betrayed with the aid of a sudden twitch. His right arm jerked at his facet, hovering by using his side pocket. "There may be one," he stated sooner or later, "an additional." Avery selected him. "Who?" I demanded. Once again, Saber's arm jerked. Wondering he turned into about to pull a weapon of a few kind from his robes, I slammed him tough in opposition to the wall, growling with fury. Upon my preparation, Emmett's superior to search the man. After patting him down, he extracted something I without a doubt hadn't been watching for, something small, vibrant and rectangular, a cellular phone. What the? Emmett's mouth dropped open with a pop, and he suddenly stopped breathing. My eyes jumped to my brother, then returned to the cell phone. After I seemed all over again into the face of the behemoth vampire, all the horror of his imagination becomes seen in his huge, blue eyes. Oh no, after which I used to be the one that couldn't breathe. Brutal worry pressured the air from my lungs inside the identical second that my strength failed. Saber dropped to the floor as my palms fell limply to my aspects. Security and simplicity and everything good in the international melted into ache and terror the second that blood-curdling scream assaulted my ears. Bella, bloody and beaten, writhed at the dusty earth, her delicate body arching with ache. Rodolphus Lestrange hovered over her, pointing his wand, a sadistic sneer warping his features. At the back of him had been his degenerate comrades, who jeered and shouted phrases of encouragement: Rookwood, Selwyn, Dolohov, Crabbe, Knott, McNair, Roll, Jugson, Travers, Ranulph, Halden, and others whose names I didn't realize. Mr. Weasley, the imperious wizard, stood far from the rest, careworn and remoted. Do not kill her too quickly, Rodolphus, Dolohov laughed. The relaxation folks want our turn too. Agree with me, the loss of life eater cackled. After watching her kill my brother, I have no aim of giving her a quick loss of life, Flagio. With one last echoing shriek, the imaginative and prescient ended. For one agonizing millisecond, I was paralyzed, suspended in silence and horror, and then total, utter madness. I was animal, a bloodthirsty savage, terrible and primitive. Launching myself at the dying eater, I had every intention of ripping his head off. Alice screamed at my brothers to restrain me, even as Rosalie and the minister took maintain of Saber, whom I had flung in opposition to the wall a second before, likely fracturing some of bones within the procedure. At the same time as Jasper and Emmett held me in vicinity, Alice took preserve of my face. Edward, we have to get to Bella. Now. There may be no time. What is taking place? Brone demanded in his confusion. The Death Eaters had been summoned with the aid of Mr. Weasley. He is the imperious wizard. If we don't locate Bella soon, they will kill her. If it were viable, the wizard became as white as a vampire at my sister's prediction. His panicked eyes flew to mine, and without some other phrase, he provided me his hand. Alice cried out to the others, but I couldn't process what she stated. My vision took on a blistering scarlet. I wanted to kill. I snatched up the wizard's hand, and accompanied him into the blackness. BPOV. It felt as if I'd been hit within the head with a bludger once I got here too. I groaned loudly and gripped my head. I'd have killed for an Advil. I didn't at once do not forget precisely how I would ended up at the quarry ground once the reminiscence lower back. However, the whole lot unexpectedly clicked into place. From the very starting, it have been Mr. Weasley. He become cursed. The dying eaters had magically coerced him to take part of their scheme. I could only bet at their cause for that they desired a person with get right of entry to Harry. That they had already expressed an hobby in killing him the night time they invaded Hogwarts. Mr. Weasley become the proper candidate. No longer simplest did he regularly stumble upon the wizard, he had also been a member of the Order of the Phoenix. Within the Beyond, Ron had stated the fact that the minister, possibly relatively carelessly, persevered to confide in those he nevertheless considered near friends, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. And who would suspect him, after all? Who might suspect a man running within the department for misuse of Muggle artifacts? A low male voice sounded to my left. I used to be afraid to open my eyes, especially when I known the sinister hiss of Rookwood. Without warning, something collided fast and tough with my ribs. The ache changed into implausible. It rippled through each mobile of my torso, leaving me whimpering at the floor, scrunched into the fetal position. Feigning unconsciousness turned into not an alternative. If something, it would most effective earn me every other kick to the ribs, or something worse, and so I allowed my eyes to flicker open, simplest to be greeted by way of the sight of a big leather boot. I regarded up to peer Rodolphus Lestrange's status over me. I would met him before, during his closing invasion of the college, whilst ID inadvertently killed his brother, Rabaston. Awake, are we? The Death Eater smiled. Suitable. My imaginative and prescient blurred as his foot smashed into my jaw, and searing white agony ripped up the side of my face. Blood crammed my mouth, and notwithstanding the latest control ID controlled to expand in that vicinity, thanks to the awakening of my internal animal, I nevertheless felt the overwhelming urge to vomit. Deep laughter stuffed the air as I spat a molar onto the ground, at the side of a mouthful of sanguine fluid. Some toes away, Rodolphus' comrades were cheering, relishing my suffering. I patted my wallet, hoping but no longer anticipating to find my wand. Rodolphus merely sneered, "It is no longer there. Arthur was kind enough to confiscate it even as you had been out." He held up my wand and waved it earlier than me. I hated seeing it in the hands of a person so repulsive, interior and out. It was an entire violation. He turned it in his arms as he tested it, nodding appreciatively. "That is a nice wand. You, if I am now not mistaken." I failed to answer. "The Darkish Lord's wand changed into also made from you," he stated, with a fanatical gleam in his eyes. "Now not many humans are chosen with the aid of you wands. Did you already know that you sap is poisonous, and that the tree itself has consequently turned out to be an image of death?" I didn't know what Rodolphus was implying, but I didn't admire the contrast with Voldemort. The core, with the maximum loathing, I glared up on the Death Eater. His hair looked as if it had been fried in chipped fats, and he possessed the general appearance of an fool. He arched his brow, impatient for my solution. "Unicorn hair. Ah, I see, exciting." His eyes trailed once more over my wand, before finally landing returned on my face. I held my ground as his smile converted into an unsightly sneer. An innocent center for this type of darkish exterior. What could it in all likelihood mean? "I know what it manner." Dolohov grinned. "Beneath that bloodless floor, there's a worried little lady. I wonder what it will take to make her cry." Rodolphus' smile grew wider. "Hermit discover, shall we?" I refused to reveal my fear as he lifted his personal wand in my direction. Trying getaway was pointless. I wouldn't stand a risk. It turned into me in opposition to them, and there were at least a dozen. Time after time, I might control to scrape my way out of the maximum not possible situations, however I could not see that going on now. "What are we going to do along with her?" Selwyn puzzled, eyes glowing with greedy anticipation. "I can think about a few things," laughed Dolohov. At his words, a violent shudder ripped up my spine. He reminded me of a hungry crocodile, and the way his gaze slowly trailed over my body appraising and voracious made me sense like a bit of meat he could not wait to sink his teeth into. "Permit us start out small, let's." Rodolphus smiled. I was thrown into the air, propelled upwards, earlier than an invisible force slammed me back down with cruel depth. Black spots shaped throughout my vision. My collision with the earth left me winded, and that I could not have screamed even if I'd desired to. "Now, Mudblood, let us see the one's pretty fingers." Although self-maintenance was an impossibility at this point, I nevertheless made an attempt, but feeble, to shield my hands from the cruel Death Eater. Stuffing them into my pockets, I felt my right hand brush towards something bloodless and smooth. A second later, I pulled out the enchanted reflect, and felt desire kindle in my breast. Obviously, Mr. Weasley hadn't seen any purpose to remove something as harmless as a searching glass. Selwyn tutted. "You recognize, arrogance is not an appropriate niece. We must assist her with that, Rodolphus." "I agree," I screamed in protest as he bent to pry the device from my trembling hands. Aside from my engagement ring, it turned into my most effective tie to Edward, so I sobbed tougher than ever while it became snatched away. "That youthful creamy skin of yours is just a little too impeccable if you inquire from me," stated Rodolphus. "A few imperfections add person to someone." I watched in horror as he magically enlarged the reflect. With exceptional alacrity, he then proceeded to prop it up in opposition to a large boulder, angling it in order that I had a clear view of my higher body. The wizard then spun lower back to stand me. Inside the following couple of moments, the whole lot seemed to occur in slow motion. Rodolphus' eyes dimmed. A tortuous calm settled over his face. I ought to have handled exhilaration, however his abrupt loss of emotion terrified me extra than something. Right here become a psychopath if ever I'd met one. All of a unexpected, he threw again his arm, high above his head, before bringing it down like a whip, slashing the air. With an atrocious crack, the curse cut via my skin as easily as a knife through butter. A excessive wail spewed through my lips, as piercing and terrible as the pain in my chest. I tossed my head because the torment persisted, only to be faced with my pitiful mirrored image. Blood became staining my white faculty blouse, and underneath the large tear within the material there lay an irritated laceration, the identical that had afflicted Draco Malfoy after the loss of Life Eaters had tortured him inside the Slytherin commonplace room. I slightly had time to brace myself before the wand cracked once more, and every other deep reduce regarded on my belly. Then any other throughout my thighs. Crucio. The sector gave manner to fire and pain because the curse tore at my body. There has been only one factor more painful than this. Simplest venom ought to inflict more torment than the Cruciatus curse. I felt as though I would been doused in oil, tied to a rack, stretched to breaking factor, and finally set alight. My backbone arched involuntarily, contorted through sheer soreness. Again, the loss of Life Eaters cheered and cackled. Don T. Kill her too speedy, Rodolphus, Travers chuckled, distracting his friend and by chance imparting me a non-permanent reprieve. The relaxation people want our turn too. Rodolphus laughed, and stated, consider me, after watching her kill my brother, I haven't any purpose of giving her a short demise. Exhausted, my head rolled to the aspect. I just desired to shut my eyes and be performed with it of root, that each one changed the second I caught sight of Edward's stunning face, furious and wonderful, an angel of vengeance and destruction as he stared again at me through the replicate, not noted by using the oblivious Dying Eaters. My subsequent scream had not anything to do with Rodolphus' flagellation curse. I howled due to the fact tanned pores and skin, sandy hair, and frosty eyes unexpectedly replaced the capabilities of my loved vampire. Brone, the hostile Auror, peered out via the glass, his eyes ingesting within the scene earlier than him. The psychopath grew to become to his pals. Who else wants a flip? He shouted cheerfully. They answered with the maximum enthusiasm, and surged forwards. I am going to experience this, Dolohov snickered. I am in reality, clearly going to experience this. The Dying Eaters formed a semicircle 3 meters from my toes, all elevating their wands in training. Resigned to my fate, I vowed to live out my previous few minutes of lifestyles as bravely as I could. With my jaw firmly clenched, and my eyes squeezed shut, I awaited my quit, determined now not to scream. After one final cackle, Rodolphus bid me farewell, and then the flip of the tide. With a simple popping sound and a gush of air, everything changed. My eyes flew open to terrified faces. Sounds of surprise and alarm crammed the air, and then the loss of Life Eaters had been taking flight. Their cries at once preceded a welcomed refrain of deep, ferocious roars heralding chaos and bloodshed. My hair was whipped across my face as 4 vampires, Edward, Jasper, Alice, and Emmett, flew over and round me, charging closer to the road of dark wizards, lips curling lower back over glistening enamel, ready for the kill. Brone rushed on at the back of them, throwing one spell after any other, his expression furious. The Demise Eaters fell like bowling pins, smashed apart by the feral electricity of the undead siblings. The lower ranking have been the first to move. Their disloyal comrades pushed them into the direction of the vampires in and tried to prevent their own obliteration. I watched in awe as Alice, my tiny, elfin pal, snapped Halden's neck like a matchstick, while Jasper and Emmett tackled Roll and McNair. My coronary heart sank as Rodolphus threw a jet of fireplace in Edward's route. His reflexes had been a great deal too speedy, and he dodged it effortlessly, before choosing up not by using his robes and flinging him at his comrade. The pair went whizzing backwards through the air, and crashed in opposition to one of the quarry's many boulders. Not was knocked out on effect, however. Rodolphus remained conscious, and fast shoved his pal aside. He turned in the process of wielding any other spell when a clamor from the sky demanded the attention of the organization. 50 meters away, wherein the woodland ended, broom-wielding flyers were diving from the canopy, and a fusion of war cries bursting from their chests as they sped toward their targets. First came Harry, Maine. The organization then got here Ginny, tied with Ron, who carried Hermione on the return of his firebolt. Screaming behind them, just like the enraged lunatics they have been George, Percy, Charlie, Bill and Fleur, then McGonagall and Flitwick and Sinstra and Hooch, Martin and Vector, Slughorn and Sprout. Down they got here, and from their wands poured a deluge of irritated red flares. Fullplume seemed out of nowhere, and joined the fray, scuffling with a long Brone who was fighting a loss of life eater handiest 5 meters or so far from wherein I laid. "This one's for you, Freddy boy." George cackled manically with insanity in his eyes. "Ull higher be watching. Deliver hell." And Freddy boy would certainly have been pleased with his duel, who transfigured Crab-ass palms into anvils. With such an substantial and impossible weight to hold, the Death Eater fell forwards onto all fours, his butt now and clean target. It became a second that might be cradled for all eternity within the loving folds of my reminiscence, the type that choirs of angels rejoice in heaven for its sheer, utter glory. George, descending from the sky at 100 miles per hour, giggling hysterically, before planting his metallic-capped boot proper into the loss of Life Eater's bottom. The following howls have been tuned to my ears, and that I knew that if I lived via this, I would absolutely be revisiting that moment after I subsequent used my pensieve. My friends and teachers persisted to use their abilities, and blasted away one enemy after some other. In the midst of all the chaos, I used to be too awestruck to move except, I didn't have a wand, so I could not actually make a contribution. I'd simply come to be getting within the way. With most of the dying eaters incapacitated, Rodolphus changed into one of the most effective 3 left standing. Edward smiled wickedly at his opponent, and dodged every other large quantity of flames. The loss of Life Eater should have realized lengthy ago that his state of affairs changed into hopeless, because the frantic look in his eyes converted into something corresponding to resignation. I knew then that he deliberate to disapparate. His head turned all of sudden in my path though. An almighty roar, a combination of fury and terror all at once drowned out every other sound. Rodolphus lifted his wand, and before my vampire had the hazard to grab it away, a streak of red flames shot from the tip. Edward's horrified face became the final component I saw before Brone thrust himself through the air before he willingly took the curse that had been entirely intended for me. With a small gasp, he fell backwards. Percy and Invoice, both of whom had landed nearby, stuck him before he could hit the floor. Clutching my shredded torso, I ignored my own ache and hurriedly scrambled to the wizard's aspect, my heart thudding wildly interior its cage. "Oh God," I cried when I saw the effusion of blood pouring from his mouth. "Oh no, someone help him. Without my wand, I used to be powerless." Bill ripped open the Auror's blouse, but there has been no trace of external damage. Edward was beside me in an instantaneous. Jasper had taken hold of Rodolphus, one arm crushing the Death Eater's windpipe, and become now hissing something into his ear, whilst he used his loose hand to crush his wand to dust. Brone coughed, and more blood shot from his mouth. Percy become just about to perform a spell what I had no concept while he turned into stopped by way of the Irish wizard himself. "Do not," he spluttered. Before everything, Percy gave the look of he was approximately to protest, a crease forming among his eyes. In the end though, he relented, and gave an unhappy nod of his head. Brone grew to become to appearance up at Edward. I wasn't exactly positive what passed among them, because the Auror uttered no words. He'd been so significantly mutilated through the curse that excessive speaking, I assume, became past him. Notwithstanding that, and judging by the mutual intensity of their gazes, I used to be fine that he become communicating with Edward. Brone gave a strained smile, and Edward nodded, before he reached right down to grip the wizard's hand. "Thanks," he stated, conveying in one easy whisper gratitude of unimaginable proportions. My rescuer's eyes flicked to me then, and prefer Edward, I reached down to entwine my hands with the ones of his loose hand. He smiled wider, and for the first time due to the fact I had met him, the sandy-haired wizard looked absolutely glad. "Ah, Isolt." A tear slipped down my cheek as Brone, the ultimate victim of Death Eater tyranny, breathed his final breath. With the golden mild of the putting solar on his face, the mild left his eyes, and he died. Silence surrounded me as I endured to crouch with the aid of the fallen hero. Those human beings who were not kneeling at Brone's side had been soaring over injured loss of Life Eaters, their wands pressed to the throats of our enemies. McGonagall became analyzing Mr. Weasley, who seemed to haven't any clue as to what turned into taking place, and was staring on the scene in whole puzzlement. "Bella." At the sound of my name, I grew to become to Edward, sighing with relief as he scooped me speedy into his palms. "You got here," I croaked. After a lot screaming, my voice was hoarse. Edward nodded solemnly, and laid a heartfelt kiss on my forehead. Apart from that, Nothing else became stated, uncooked as we had been, following the struggle and the following dying of groan. Edward carried me back to the burrow, at the same time as the oars poured in to arrest the loss of life eaters. My belly rumbled the entire way returned, and, considering what had just took place, I couldn't help however feel responsible for my body's reactions to hunger. 2 hours spent inside the frame of a ferocious predator clearly gave a lady an appetite. I could not recall ever being so hungry. Carlyle became looking forward to us on the burrow. He concluded that one night's stay in the hospital wing at Hogwarts would be okay for my healing. I was transported there without delay. Edward remained through my facet whilst Madame Pomfrey fussed over my injured frame. First, she fed me with a blood-replenishing potion then, after waving her wand a few instances over the bloody lacerations, which healed for the maximum element, she dabbed me with dittany. Lamentably, the flagellation curse took a long time to get over. The injuries closed, but the burn remained. I ought to still feel the whip on my skin, and I knew that even as I would be capable of pass freely without having to fear approximately the gashes opening again, the ache could stay with me for at the least per week. The equal have been authentic for Draco Malfoy, after the Demise Eaters had tortured him within the Slytherin not unusual room. He had felt the hearth on his pores and skin for a complete fortnight, and were so critically injured by the flagellation curse that Gryffindor's sport with Slytherin had been postponed till the quit of the 12 months. The very last remedy the witch issued got here inside the form of a spoonful of foul-smelling liquid. This changed into reputedly used for redeveloping tooth, and on the grounds that I did not take pleasure in the concept of spending eternity without a complete set, I drank it gladly. Madame Pomfrey made a comic story approximately the teeth fairy at one factor, but I actually could not discover any enthusiasm for her weak sense of humor, and ultimately pretended to doze off. I had run more than 15 miles to locate Mr. Weasley. I were kicked, whipped and tortured, and that I had watched a man take a curse for me, which resulted inside the lack of his life. Hungry and exhausted, it wasn't long earlier than I truly did drop into unconsciousness. Edward's hand cupping my cheek turned into the final component I felt earlier than my eyes closed. George turned into the first character I saw once I awakened. He became leaning over me with a curious expression on his face, probable trying to find symptoms of life. Hiya, she's awake, he said cheerfully. Idea it would in no way appear, you lazy bugger. The way you feelin', Belsie? That terrible, No, I am simply despairing on the state of your nostrils. George gave a hearty laugh. What's up? There may be a motive why I don't easy them. I am stocking up on crucial elements for wizard wheezes. Please inform me you are joking, gagged Hermione, who was standing off to the left by means of Ron, Harry and Ginny. The Cullens occupied the distance to the proper of my bed. Carlyle become the best vampire that wasn't gift. He must nonetheless be on the medical institution. How are you feeling, Bella? Alice requested. I shrugged and eased myself into a sitting role. Apart from a bit of toothache, I am not too terrible. Of direction, I was lying. Underneath my pajamas my flesh turned into on hearth. Edward failed to miss the way I winced, and the concerned crease soon crammed the space among his eyes. I am exceptional, I tried to guarantee him, throwing him an extensive smile. He did not ought to go through with me. Emmett's booming laughter disrupted the quiet. He doubled over, and smacked his hands in opposition to his knees. Beside him, Rosalie and Jasper had been truly attempting to suppress comparable laughter. After they did not enlighten me at the supply of their enjoyment, Edward stepped in. Just forget about them, Bella. It's not anything. As if, his brother cried, her teeth are almost luminous. My hand routinely flew to my mouth. Emmett Best laughed more difficult at my self-focus. Like I stated, Edward sighed, frowning at his brother, ignore him. There is actually nothing incorrect with you, Bella. The solution you took to regrow your teeth had a secondary effect, that's all. Secondary effect? Basically, Ron smiled, your enamel are so pearly we ought to use them for jewelry. Even the Cullens cannot compete with you. The appearance of horror that settled over my face produced a wave of tender chuckles. I lunged for the mirror on my bedside table, ignoring the protesting ache in my stomach, and peered into the glass. Gah, Bella, Edward grimaced, it without a doubt isn't always that terrible. Bad, Edward, I appear to be a mouthful of fairy lighting. An unnaturally white celebrity smile I should have lived with, however those were so super that they reflected the light within the same manner that vampire pores and skin did. I had sparkly tooth. I am never going so that you can smile in public once more, I groaned. Oh, nonsense, omit Swan, Madame Pomfrey chided. A few cups of espresso and they'll be as right as rain. The witch, who changed into sitting in a big leather-based chair, analyzing a romance novel on the away side of the room, wasn't normally so detached to crowds inside the sanatorium wing. As matters were, I used to be currently her simplest affected person, and apart from aching gums wherein my new molar became breaking through, and the indignant red scars masking my body, I used to be returned to ordinary. My sight visitors left whilst I modified out of my pajamas. Madame Pomfrey desired to keep me in until the pain of the lacerations dwindled, but I wasn't approximately to spend per week in bed. I might end up going out of my mind. Alice had passed me my outfit for the day earlier than she stepped out of the room. It consisted of cropped, skinny chinos made from khaki silk and a thin brown belt, a sleeveless cream shirt with an antique ruffle, brown steel pumps and, of path, the Newton ball, my personal safeguard against inherent clumsiness. In keeping with the faculty nurse, it changed into 10 o'clock inside the morning. The day gone by had tired me so absolutely that I'd slept for 14 hours. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had joined the others by the point I made my manner out of the health facility wing. They had been waiting for me in the hall outdoor, which became quite a whole lot deserted, thanks to the truth that maximum of the scholars had gone domestic for Easter. Mrs. Weasley changed into the first to hug me. She swept me into a tight embody the moment I stepped through the door, and thanked me profusely for locating her husband. I couldn't forestall the wince that broke via my lips. Realizing her mistake, the witch took a step again and quickly apologized, before transferring apart to make room for her husband. I am so very sorry, Bella, he murmured, placing a hand on my shoulder. Can you ever forgive me for what happened the previous day? Mr. Weasley, it wasn't your fault, I insisted. The wizard shook his head and pulled back. I must have been strong enough to combat it. I tried. I realize, in any other case why might you have wandered thus far away? The wizard nodded. He regarded to have 1 year in look over the last few months. The pressure of the curse had weighed heavily on his health, and now he turned into sprouting a streak of gray hair along the side of his head. I nonetheless cannot accept as true with it become you, Dad, George chuckled. Who might have concept? Mr. Weasley didn't appearance as if he appreciated his son's amused mindset, and as a substitute chose to disregard it. I tried to inform Ron in the health facility, he said, turning to the wizard in question. I tried to warn you when he couldn't finish, but I could work the relaxation out for myself. It have been Mr. Weasley's spell that had introduced boulders and rubble crashing down on my Quidditch pals. Underneath the affect of the imperious curse, he had nearly killed his personal son. The quarry become our meeting place, he went on, blanching as he spoke. The dying eaters ordered me to kill you if the possibility offered itself, however I resisted, and so as a substitute they instructed me to get you to the quarry, and speak to them while we arrived. Contact them how? I asked. Edward gave me my answer. He held up a small silver cell smartphone. At the beginning, I checked out him as though looking forward to the punch line. When I realized there wasn't one, my mouth almost hit the ground. Are you severe? He nodded. The ministry has been tracking wizard communications all year. Owls had been being intercepted, and the flow community become continuously below surveillance. The loss of life eaters have been even afraid to use Patronuses. That's why they resorted to mobile phones, a blushing Mr. Weasley persisted. I would have been the one to offer that concept. They had been pretty disgusted with it at the start, however, in the long run, they couldn't deny the blessings. There has been no way for the ministry to intercept that form of transmission. I suppose I even advised email at one point, however that changed into pushing it. Properly, it is honest enough, I said, but phones do not work in areas with high magical hobby. How did you get round that? Mr. Weasley blushed again. He bit his lip and forged his eyes all the way down to his shuffling toes. Rookwood ordered McNair to take up admin paintings. They stationed him in a deserted farm residence. McNair is in, the executioner. This is the only, Ron snorted, flinging his arm around Hermione's shoulder, who in flip wound one among her personal round his waist. tried to kill Buckbeak, bear in mind. I nodded. Yes, I remembered. By some means, he did not strike me as the secretarial kind. Nor me, smirked George. I wonder if a skirt was a part of his uniform. Mr. Weasley rolled his eyes. No, however I am advised he spent a notable deal of his time gambling Tetris. Apparently, he changed into Pretty the Addict. What is Tetris, Dad? It is a recreation that, by no means mind. Due to the fact Mr. and Mrs. Weasley have been because of provide proof on the ministry, they have been pressured to go away earlier than they could absolutely fulfill my interest. Thankfully, Edward turned into there to fill me in. He introduced all of the information as soon as we made it lower back to his dormitory. The Death Eaters had placed the Imperious Curse on Mr. Weasley inside the fall of the preceding 12 months. He, in turn, had cursed Trelawney in order that she let the loss of Life Eaters in beyond the Whomping Willow on the night of the masquerade ball. He used the puking pastilles from the skiving snack box line to escape the terrific corridor. Outdoor the toilet, he had consumed the anti-candy, before locating his goal and appearing the curse. Subsequently, he again to the toilet, eaten a third candy, and spent the next 5 minutes barfing in one of the cubicles till his wife arrived. Greater these days, he had informed Saber that Edward had spied on him while he turned into busy confronting Alpheus Truman. Edward had conveyed his discovery and planned to confront the wizard for the duration of our experience to St. Mungo's. The Weasleys have been there to look at over Harry and Ron. I were there due to the fact Paul and Leah had almost killed me after mistaking me for a vampire. Mr. Weasley had discovered of Kingsley S. and Edward S. intentions via his son, Charlie. Initially, we thought Cormac McLaggen had blabbed, but it turned out that we were wrong. After Iago Cleedon learnt that he become a top suspect, he concocted the fragrance-distorting potion, and whilst he subsequent met the Cullens, they could not deny that his personal bouquet changed into a mile away from that of the Halloween attacker. So every single time the Demise Eaters outsmarted the Aurors, it turned into all because Mr. Weasley changed into passing on information. Quite tons. Normally, he heard all of the ambushing plans from the minister himself. Kingsley by no means suspected Arthur, and because they confided in each other so regularly during the Order days, the minister endured to achieve this even after the dying of Voldemort. I shook my head in disbelief. Edward hugged me toward him. It turned into a comfort to be so close to him. The Cullens hadn't followed us up to the dormitory. After the ordeal of the beyond 24 hours, I assume they realized that we wanted some space. Edward fell into silence as he stared up on the ceiling. His inexperienced eyes have been intense, but out of attention, and it become clear that he was deep in concept. His hands ghosted up and down my backbone, tracing patterns once in a while across my shoulder blades. What are you considering? A half-of-hearted smile played at the edges of his mouth. Is not that normally my line? He sighed whilst I waited for him to continue, before finally assembling my gaze. I used to be considering Brone. At the mention of the late Auror, I used to be without delay sucked into a maelstrom of a dozen exclusive emotions. I could not sort out one from the alternative. My mind had been trapped in entire pandemonium. I had slightly acknowledged the wizard, but he had thrown himself between me and the loss of Life Eater who otherwise might have destroyed me. The painful memory became not possible to get away. It echoed in my head just like the blusterous howl of a gale, haunting and treacherous. I would recognize the red flame and immediately it become the same spell that Dolohov had used to hospitalize Hermione. The simplest motive my friend had escaped demise inside the first place became because the Death Eater were prevented from uttering the curse aloud, having fallen issue to a silencing appeal. Brone had no such good fortune. I don't understand why he did it, I whispered, leaning over Edward, whose glazed eyes eventually resumed their recognition. I suggest, he failed to recognize me. He had no purpose. He had every motive, Edward argued softly. He lifted his hand to my face and permit his icy thumb flow across my cheek. My frame reacted in its standard manner, and regardless of the relax of his contact, heat stirred underneath the pores and skin he turned into presently devoting a lot interest to. At my blush, he leaned as much as kiss me. My heartbeat thundered wildly in my chest at the touch, and I resented the truth that I had so little manage over my frame's responses. Finally, Edward sighed and pulled away, sinking go into reverse till his head touched the ivory pillow. How can I place this? He puzzled morosely. Brone changed into, he become worn out. He misplaced his spouse to a wicked vampire. Hate and rage fed on him. A lot in order that his obsession with revenge became the only aspect he needed to live for. And then he found our enterprise with James, and all desire of vengeance went out the window. To put it really, he lost his purpose for living. Brone knew what he turned into sacrificing whilst he jumped in front of that curse, Bella, Edward stated. His stare turned into so severe that I may want to barely keep it. The answer, or so he would have stated, became no longer lots. Besides, he felt indebted to us, and he hated that owing a favor to a circle of relatives of vampires. On the other hand, I suppose he'd every day by the end that we weren't the evil creatures he'd initially taken us for. All the unhappiness of the sector regarded to weigh on Edward's shoulders as he explained Brone's reasons. He told me that in his very last moments, the wizard's greatest worry become that another should must go through the equal horrific cease that fate had dealt him, and I felt that a younger lady inside the high of life should be killed so cruelly, and that a apparently top man have to lose his purpose for being. We had been 4 miles away once I saw the quarry through the spy band. I may not have made it in time if it hadn't been for Brone. He used your present to construct an photo in his head, and then he took us there. I owe him the whole lot, whispered Edward, eyes afire. The whole thing that the whole thing I am going to have. The keenness in his words stuck me off protect. I didn't note the movement of his arm, however I suddenly felt his hand on my hip. Goosebumps erupted underneath my blouse as his arms moved to the center of my belly. What do you mean? I blurted unexpectedly, before I lost my train of concept. Unluckily, I obtained no reply. An extensive grin unfolded across my fiancé's face, one which touched his eyes and cupped a pleasure so obvious and excessive that it left me speechless. It became earnest, yet secretive, as though he was in ownership of privileged information. Sooner or later, the beautiful vampire released a peal of low, musical laughter warm enough to melt butter. He ruffled my hair, and stated, the marriage, of direction. What else would I be talking about? For some motive though, this solution left me unsatisfied, and Edward persevered to grin in a way that made me effective. He changed into hiding something. Yet again, his fingers moved lovingly over my stomach, propelling my jumbled mind to a brand new stage of incoherency. When he kind of tugged my face right down to his a second later, all wish of lucidity was shattered. Whatever his secret, for I used to be sure he had one, he become Edward, in the end it might have to watch for another day. EPOV. May, a warm, pleasant month, the penultimate of the academic calendar. A month in which NEWT students frantically prepare for their grueling summative assessments. More importantly, some would say, the month the one victorious team lifts the Quidditch Cup. Across the table, Bella violently stabbed the sausage on her plate. She had no intention of eating it, of course. She rarely ate before she was due to play. The only purpose the food served now was to prepare her mentally for what she was about to do. Her eyes possessed none of their usual gentleness. If anything, they were slightly psychotic, chocolate buttons on fire as she mutilated the remains of a once happy farm animal. When the meat, a substitute for Slytherins, had been thoroughly shredded, Bella moved on to her toast, which she quickly began pulling to pieces, grinning wickedly all the while. Bella, don't you think you'll be better prepared if you eat something? I questioned, finally interceding. I'd never seen her like this before. Even when Gryffindor had faced the other teams, there had only been the signs of fierce determination. Now I understood why she frightened people. I've met sweeter-looking serial killers. Bella grunted, but otherwise did not answer. I turned to stare worriedly at my siblings. By the looks of things, they were reluctant to speak. No one wanted to provoke the Gryffindor chaser, who may or may not have been contemplating bloody murder. Only Emmett looked encouraged. Excellent, he thought, eagerly shuffling forwards. He was so excited for the match that he could barely sit still. His gaze shifted from Bella to Amicus, who was cheerfully seated beside her, tossing one scoop of scrambled eggs after another into his mouth with wild abandon. When I peered over to the Slytherin table, the students were laughing heartily amongst themselves, exuding an easy confidence. As far as they were concerned, their house had already won. For Gryffindor to overcome them, we'd need to finish the game with a 260-point lead, meaning that Harry would only be able to catch the snitch when we were 110 points ahead of our opposition. That put an incredible amount of pressure on Bella, Ginny and Viola. Almost everyone seemed to feel the tension. It was as if a thick sheet of black clouds had descended over the team, which wouldn't have been all that unusual, considering we were seated beneath the enchanted ceiling of the great hall. However, it was perfectly sunny outside, so the heavy atmosphere had nothing to do with the weather. I perked up at the sound of my father's mind. He was in the process of leading a pack of gawking men down the grand staircase, and I had to wonder whether or not I had worn the same dumbfounded expression during my first visit to the school. Nudging Jasper, I murmured, "They here." My brother chuckled lowly and turned to look at Bella. Her vendetta against her breakfast was ongoing, so when a wave of curious and excited whispering swept through the great hall like a breeze through long grass, she remained completely oblivious. Holy hot dog! I am in heaven. This is heaven. With a gasp, Bella suddenly dropped her fork and shot up from the bench. She whirled on the spot, searching for the owner of the deep American voice. When her eyes were greeted with the sight of 7 familiar faces, her jaw almost hit the floor. Charlie, Jacob, Embry, Quill, Jared, Paul and Seth were standing in the aisle separating the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables. Embry, Quill, Seth and Jared, the last of which had been the one to alert Bella, had their twinkling eyes on the many platters of food covering the tables, and were licking their lips with anticipation. "Hey, kiddo," Charlie smiled, looking at his daughter. "Dad," answered Bella, blinking with disbelief. What are you? We here to watch you play." "What?" Jacob stepped forwards, his casual posture giving no hint of discomfort. It was as if he hadn't noticed the scrutiny he and his friends were receiving. "You heard him, Bells," he grinned. We here to watch you kick some serious behind." Bella shook her head, continuing to stare at the pair in total shock and awe. All around, the students were eyeing the newcomers, most of whom were receiving looks of appreciation from the female half of the student body. "Basically," Charlie continued sheepishly, "we offered to buy new supplies for your school. We made a considerable donation, and then your headmistress was kind enough to invite us to watch Quidditch as a thank you." Bella crossed her arms. Obviously, she wasn't buying it. You lot made a considerable donation. It's true. And I am a pygmy puff." What now?" "Never mind." She stared at the new arrivals for one moment longer, savoring the sight of them, before she suddenly dashed towards them, and flung her arms around their necks. Charlie patted her on the back, and after extricating himself, allowed Jacob to lift her off the floor. Although I was slightly irked by the whole thing, I was at least grateful for the fact that the wolves were fully dressed. Of course, any jealousy I felt went completely out the window when lo and behold, Talto Bella's lovable, if not slightly naughty, familiar dropped 2 cheeky fresh ones on the heads of my rival himself and Paul, the Quileute who had almost killed Bella at Christmas. "What the EU? Damn it, Bella." I was powerless to prevent the roar of laughter that subsequently spilled from my mouth. Not one of my siblings seemed to be able to control themselves either, and if we could have cried, every single one of us would have been doubled over in floods of tears. Rosalie accidentally put a crack in the table as she banged her fists against the wood, howling with laughter all the while. Emmett and Jasper leaned against each other for support. Alice and I were just as bad, and our violent glee quickly propelled the rest of the hall into similar fits of hilarity. Jacob's unforgiving attitude didn't relent, and he continued to glare up at the owl, who was currently in the process of performing his usual victory shuffle on one of the rafters. Paul, meanwhile, barely reacted. "I guess I deserved that one," he muttered, looking up at the feathery rogue. His gaze quickly fell on my fiancée, who seemed just as amused by the scene as the rest of us. "Let's just forget about it, she said, once her laughter subsided. "It's in the past." And that was all that was said on the matter. Bella and Paul put the past behind them just like that. Despite the fact that the wolf's hair was still smeared with the remains of Talto's last meal, his bright eyes twinkled with gratitude and relief. He was thrilled that Bella was willing to wipe the slate clean, and she seemed just as happy for the fresh start. Charlie, on the other hand, looked on at the Quileute with a less forgiving eye. The wicked smirk he wore as he gazed up at Talto's gift was encouraging. Judging by the tenor of his mind, I gathered that he accepted that Paul was truly sorry for what happened at Christmas time, but that didn't lessen his anger, and if the characteristic stubbornness of the Swan family was anything to go by, it would be a long while before the wolf made it back in the police chief's good books. For that, I was happy. My own animosity was still too sharp for anything less. I was only glad that Leah had decided to stay away. Charlie and the wolves sat down to eat. While Hermione used her magical skills to remove the droppings from Paul S. and Jacob S. hair, Bella S. father filled her in on the truth behind their visit. Of course, we have Edward to thank for this. The witch's lips twitched as she stared at me from the corner of her eye. Yeah, I'd guessed as much. It's the last time you'll play for your house, I shrugged. I thought it would be nice if you could have your dad here. Bella stared at me for a long while. All around us, the wolves were either shoveling food into their mouths, or locked in animated conversations with the students. I couldn't absorb anything they were saying though, because I was captivated by Bella's face, which held so much beauty and intensity as she stared at me that I was powerless to look away. Thank you, she said finally, intertwining our fingers beneath the table. You're very welcome, I replied fervently. After a few moments, Bella's gratitude melted into new emotion. Infectious giggling filled the air, and she shook her head. I can't believe you bribed the headmistress. Hey, even McGonagall has her price. Can you imagine the criticism she'd get if she turned down the opportunity for all those new broomsticks? And cauldrons. Don't forget those. Yes, I smiled, and astronomy equipment, and expensive potion ingredients, etc., etc. You're unbelievable. En glad about dat, Charlie inserted through a mouthful of food. Fans Edward. No problem. I threw Charlie a warm smile, and he responded with one of his own. Jacob saw the exchange and shifted uncomfortably on the bench. He didn't like or appreciate my growing friendship with Bella's father. For so long, he'd been the favorite, and yet, much to my delight, things were quickly changing. When I listened to Charlie's mind, I realized that he, quite simply, was content. This was definitely a new development. In the past, the police chief had radiated an awkward resentment whenever he observed my affections for Bella. There was no trace of that anymore, though. Now, my loving regard for his daughter resulted in quite the opposite. If anything, Bella's glowing face when she looked at me sparked a quiet satisfaction in her father, as did the easy and tender way our fingers fitted together when we joined hands. I reveled in the change, elated by the long-awaited acceptance. Put a fork in me, Charlie grunted, after pushing away his empty plate. He glanced down at his daughter's plate, which was still covered with her mangled breakfast. Aren't you eating, kid? Bella shook her head. Chances are I'll get a punch to the gut in the next couple of hours. I don't want to throw up. Charlie looked taken aback. If anyone hurts her, I'll hurt them, I thought dangerously, grinding my teeth, but, of course, Bella would argue that it was all a part of the game. Charlie dismissed the comment with a shake of his head. What about you, Edward? Not hungry? Nervous laughter washed up my throat. No, I am not. That was the moment it happened, the moment I should have foreseen, the moment that held the potential to shatter everything. Seamus leaned forwards to smirk down the table. He's saving room for when we drink from the cup. Once the rest of us are done with it, we're going to fill it with blood for the vampires. The tension was instantaneous. As if ensnared by the merciless grip of winter, the whole world seemed to freeze. Charlie's eyes were wide as his head snapped up in Seamus' direction. Like Bella and my siblings, I gasped. The senseless revelation leached the color from Charlie's cheeks, destroying his mellow expression in a heartbeat. A dozen different emotions washed over his face within the space of 3 seconds, everything from fear to outright anger. Slowly, he turned his burning eyes back on Bella and me. Beside him, Jacob looked both wary and smug. I think you had better explain, Charlie barked at his daughter. If the nearby Gryffindors hadn't been listening before, they were now. Bella winced. Surprise. The muscles of her father's jaw and forehead twitched with stress as he waited for the witch to continue. Dad, I don't really know what to say. That makes 2 of us, he seethed, before turning his eyes on me. Well, of all the rotten luck, Rosalie thought, scowling at Seamus, who, unable to hold her gaze, was staring down at his feet instead, feeling like a total imbecile. I am a complete pillock. With a sigh, I held Charlie's blistering stare, and pointed to my brother. Emmett is still harboring a grudge against the thing that nearly killed him in 1935. He likes to hunt bear, I prefer lion. Sometimes we hunt elk as well, but they're not as appealing as carnivores. At Hogwarts, we generally stick to Dragon-S blood. I could practically hear the cogs working in Charlie's head while I explained. For the longest time, he couldn't say a word, but finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, he arranged his thoughts enough to voice them. You eat animals. Yes. Another long pause followed my response, in which time Charlie nodded, his shoulders seeming to loosen, though only in the slightest. Guess I do too. I felt the corners of my mouth twitch very slightly. That's it. Keep thinking that way. Why you don't kill people then? No, Charlie, we not like that. He nodded again, before gnawing at his lip. His hard stare gradually softened as curiosity took hold. He was still wary, however, as he looked me over, head tilted slightly to the left. Fangs. I chuckled. No. Do you sleep in coffins? I never sleep, but I wouldn't choose a coffin for a bed, even if I could, sir. Allergic to garlic? No, sir. Holy water. I shook my head. Burned by the sun? No. I sparkle in the sunlight, sir. You, Charlie blinked, taken aback by my newest revelation. His mouth fell open and he sat a little straighter, before a frown formed on his face. You, sparkle? Yes, sir. I wasn't entirely sure how Charlie would take the news. What I hadn't expected was that he would throw back his head and start roaring with laughter. I held Bella tightly as the sound of her father's hooting filled the hall, carrying over the voices of the students and teachers. Everyone turned to stare at him. Even the Slytherins were curious as to what was going on. Charlie's eyes traveled around our group as he continued to cackle. When his gaze landed on Jasper, his laughter got louder. When his eyes found Emmett, he burst into tears and started banging his fists against the table. Emmett huffed, his nostrils flaring with indignation. Why is everyone forgetting the fact that we're the most dangerous species on the planet? Simple, I muttered, my voice barely audible. Because we sparkle. Oh, that's a good one, Charlie chortled, wiping his eyes when his laughter finally began to subside. That's that's a really good one. Although I was glad he was no longer staring daggers at me, the alternative wasn't much better. I had once been self-conscious about my reactions to sunlight, but, at the time, it had been for another reason entirely. I had assumed it would frighten Bella, that she would decide we were completely incompatible, and that I was something strange and terrible. While Charlie stared at me as though I'd suffered the worst fate known to man, however, shaking his head in sympathy, I felt new insecurities stirring within me, ones that were foreign. Sparkly skin, after all, could hardly be described as a terrifying manly quality. My brothers seemed to realize this too, and were equally embarrassed. If anyone says anything, Emmett decided, I'll maintain that jealousy is at work. Sparkles plus vampirism equals babe magnet, Emmett, and don't you forget it, which of course you won't, because your memory is infallible. Yeah, that'll work, unless it's a woman taking the mickey. That would be a serious problemo. Somehow, I managed to tune out my brother's internal monologue, so that I could concentrate on other things. Beside me, Bella shook with silent laughter. Not you as well. Sorry, Edward, at least you pretty. I groaned. I had to go and open my big mouth, didn't I? The consolation was that Charlie convinced himself without any additional input from me or the others that my family was a mile away from the traditional vampires of horror movies, so much so that he didn't seem to care about what we ate to keep up our strength. He told me to my face that he couldn't imagine a more disgusting form of nourishment, but as long as humans didn't suffer as a result of our vampirism, he didn't really care. He'd learned too much over the last couple of months to let this shock him, so he accepted what I was far quicker than I could ever have dreamed possible. You're not telling him the whole truth, bloodsucker, Jacob butted in, annoyed with Charlie's indifference. What about the others out there? Have you forgotten about the leeches that tried to kill Bella? I already know about those, Charlie said calmly. Belle's told me all about them at Christmas. And that doesn't bother you? The wolf gawked with incredulousness, evidently just as shocked as the rest of us by Charlie's unruffled demeanor. Well, of course it does, Jake, but what am I to do about it? Humans kill too, and I can't stop that either. It doesn't mean I like it. But you still don't care that your daughter hangs out with vampires. Charlie snorted. Jake, you're a werewolf, and you didn't seem too fussed when Bella, which I might add, hung out with you. Jacob grunted, but took the hint and dropped the subject. No point anyway. She'll only bite my head off. Bella frowned at her grumpy friend, who obviously hated the idea of giving in. If I remember rightly, you promised not to interfere with this anymore, Jake. At Christmas, remember? Jacob smirked. Old habits die hard, Bells. I couldn't resist. Plus, this is getting boring, Emmett interjected, rolling of his eyes. We've had this conversation a million times now. He leaned forwards on the bench, casting his head from side to side to take in the wolves. Just so we all clear, can we please establish the fact, once and for all, that Bella a witch is marrying Edward a vampire, and unless she insists on walking down the aisle in a garbage bag, thus incurring the wrath of a hyper-death pixie, Dante asked, Charlie, nothing, not even a pack of moody, pubescent wolves, or a bride-eating cyclops, or the chance of rain is going to stop them. Get me? With a penetrating stare, Emmett searched the faces of each member of our group, earning a dozen muttered replies of agreement. Now, he said, folding his arms, can we please start talking about Quidditch already? All this negativity is killing my high. Not exactly sure where that came from, thought Seth, but, ditto. I'll second that, offered Charlie, equally eager for a change in topic. And that was that. In truth, I couldn't blame Jacob. If it had been the other way around, I would have never stopped fighting for Bella. Still, I was glad when the focus of the discussion switched to tactics. The wolves listened enthusiastically while Harry issued instructions and words of encouragement to his teammates. Girls, you know what you have to do, don't you? The Gryffindor chasers nodded. This is our last chance to beat Slytherin. We won to get another. If they win today, we'll have to live with that fact for the rest of our lives, and there'll be no hope of settling the score. I don't know about you, but, personally, I think the idea is completely unacceptable. Agreed, Ron and Bella said together. Harry nodded, his face set with a stony expression. Right, then we clear on the approach. We play like our lives depend on it. No holding back, no missed opportunities, no pain. The fists of the players slammed against the table in unison, signaling their assent. One by one, they rose from the benches, preparing to exit the hall. A moment later, I saw the Slytherin team get to their feet. In a tight line, they confidently strode down the aisle separating the tables, their smirks mimicked by the students they left behind. Daphne Greengrass and her sister, Astoria, both of whom had their eyes cast in Bella's direction, smiled coolly. The jeering of Pansy Parkinson and Millicent Bulstrode could be heard over the lively chatter of the other students. In a bid to shatter my fiancée's cool exterior, they targeted her with mocking words, evidently aware of the exact buttons they needed to press to get a reaction. Bella's arms shook with rage. It was clear that she was trying to ignore them, but that must have been about as easy as sitting at the center of a swarm of wasps, and feigning indifference at the constant stinging. The whole team is completely pathetic, Pansy said, a wicked gleam in her eye as she inspected her nails with fake boredom. Why anyone, mudblood or not, would want their disgusting muggle father to watch them lose is entirely beyond me. My lightning reflexes were the only thing that stopped Bella from transforming the witch into something befitting of her character, a snake, maybe, or, better yet, pig slime. She's not worth it, I whispered, while Bella struggled against my hold. I don't care. She crossed the line, Edward. Insulting me is one thing, but Charlie. I know, but a reaction is exactly what she wants. Bella, you're a threat. They'll do anything to get you out of the game. You know McGonagall will be very upset if she's forced to give you detention. Although Charlie had failed to hear the reprehensible comment of the Slytherin female, preoccupied as he had been in chatting with Alice, his wary eyes were now completely glued to his daughter, whose anger set all the newcomers on edge, and some of the students too. The wolves, of course, had heard the insult all too clearly. While half of the pack kept their anxious eyes on Bella, the others were turned in the direction of the guilty witch, who quickly blanched after becoming the focus of so many burning glares. I continued to keep a safe hold on Bella, preventing her from snatching up her wand. She trembled with fury, her chest rising and falling at a rapid pace. Finally, however, she regained some measure of control, enough to summon a false mask of calm, and so I cautiously released her, my arms moving stiffly to my sides. She needs to focus, Emmett decided, stepping up behind Bella. Gently, he touched her shoulder, but failing to anticipate the sudden contact, the witch flinched. Emmett's face was incredibly cheerful as he glanced over her shoulder in the direction of the Slytherins. "Save some of that rage for the game, precious," he practically sang. "I won't be happy unless I see a few broken bones." Part of me wanted to protest, but then I thought better of it and bit my tongue. As if anything I could say would stop the fouls. I might as well ask a lion to turn vegan. Despite my disapproval, I allowed the exchange to continue without interruption. Bella, on the other hand, seemed to appreciate Emmett's encouragement, and returned his wicked grin with one of her own. Aye, coach, good woman. Now," said my brother, pointing to the great doors of the hall, "get your bad self out there, Bells, and show 'em what happens when you mess with a Cullen." The inspirational send-off given by the Quidditch fanatic reminded me of the favorite catchphrase of two of Bella's oldest friends. As I bid her farewell, conveying my wishes for good luck with a chaste kiss to her cheek, 3 glorious and unforgettable words roared in my head. No matter what the cost, no matter the lengths she would be forced to go, to the last and vital order of a once vivacious scoundrel would undoubtedly be fulfilled. One way or another, I knew without doubt that Bella, my incredible, breathtaking witch, whose cape and hair billowed out behind her as she marched from the room, would persistently and enthusiastically do her duty to remind all Hogwarts of Fred's legacy. If she succeeded, the outcome would be simple, and these words would never die: with joy in your heart and cheer on your face, proudly give them hell. A rhythmic boom filled the stadium as we waited for the teams to make their way out. The students thumped their fists against the wooden railings, and stamped their feet against the floor, exercising their anticipation and impatience into thunderous sound. Although Charlie and the Wolves had been allocated honorary seats in the teacher's box, they had requested that they instead be allowed to mingle with the students, and so to my left sat Bella's father and the Quileutes. The spot we'd chosen was shaded from the sun. Jasper and I reasoned that it would be better for the players if we kept out of direct sunlight. It would make it far more difficult for the Seekers to detect the snitch if they had our sparkly skin to contend with. Charlie and Seth joked that our reasoning sprung from male insecurities, which of course we denied completely. That hadn't prevented the sniggering on our walk to the Quidditch pitch. Both Bella's father and the young wolf thought our glittering appearance hilarious. Jasper's response was along the lines of "you wish you were this cool." As well as the newcomers, my siblings and I were joined by several human friends, including Hermione, Hagrid, Seamus, Dean, Neville and Luna, the last of whom was sporting her usual Gryffindor versus any other team but Ravenclaw headdress. The wolves gawked in absolute fascination, especially Embry, who seemed quite taken with the peculiar witch. "I do hope Gryffindor will triumph. Oh look, there's a cloud in the shape of a bobcat. It must be a sign." Embry blinked moronically, and seemed unable to speak. At his hesitation, Luna whacked him around the head with her Quibbler magazine. "Hey, what are you? It's all right. I am getting rid of them for you." "Getting rid of what?" The wide-eyed wolf panicked. "The Raxperts, of course. I recognize the signs." While Luna continued to bat Embry over the head, I turned my face into Rosalie's shoulder, who sat on my right, attempting to suppress her own laughter. "I don't understand," Embry cried, receiving a thwack to the nose. Luna determinedly continued her attack. When she'd done with him, she turned her attention to the other Quileutes, who continued to gawk in the same way their friend had. "Oh dear," said the witch in a dreamy fashion, "it looks like I've got my work cut out for me." The hilarity of the situation was immense, and my friendly affection for Luna Lovegood soared to new heights. The wolves had no idea how to react when their assailant began using their heads like the targets in Whack-a-Mole arcade game. Her face was scrunched with stubborn resolve and the utmost concentration, and I couldn't help but encourage her vendetta. "You get those Raxperts, Luna." "Oh, I will. I don't get it," thought Jacob, shielding his head. "This chick is crazy." And so it went on. Luna looked very proud of herself by the time she'd finished. Her Quibbler, unfortunately, was left in tatters, but she said it had been worth it, and I was inclined to agree. I laughed with my siblings while the visitors scratched their heads in total confusion. Eventually, however, our chuckles were interrupted by the sound of Emmett's deep voice, which rumbled through the air like thunder. As always, He occupied a good portion of the front row up in the teacher's box, where he was eagerly awaiting the start of the game. "And here they come, folks," he cried as the Slytherin team confidently sauntered onto the pitch, broomsticks in hand. Their casual advance was nothing like the usual march of the Gryffindors, who always exited the changing rooms in the same tight and practiced formation, Harry at the head, the 3 chasers behind him, and the remaining players at the rear, Ron and the 2 beaters. "The Slytherins exit the changing rooms in sloppy formation," Emmett commented, ignoring the reproachful prod my mother gave to his shoulder. "For the benefit of the newbies, here we have Draco Malfoy the Slytherin captain and Seeker the chasers Matthew Harper, Blaise Zabini and Arachne Blackhand the beaters Octus Blackhand and Gregory Goyle and the keeper, Graham Pritchard." The team received a tumult of applause from their house. The students of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, on the other hand, countered the calls of support with cheerful booing. "And here come the glorious Reds," Emmett cried to the joy of the crowds. The roar of the fans exploded through the stadium, and Charlie seemed in danger of hyperventilating. "That's Bella," he screamed, his hands tight on the railing. "Oh my God, that's Bella. That's Bella." Quill and Embry squealed in delight, while Jacob stared on in awed silence, clearly overwhelmed by the fierce expression worn by his best friend. There was a hint of gold in her eyes as she marched with fierce determination onto the pitch with her teammates. The Wolves noticed it too, but the shade was too subtle to be detected by weaker eyes. Alice laughed darkly. "Ada girl." The players take their position as Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy shake hands. My, that was awkward. They look like they've been force-fed rotten pickles. Now I've never tried pickles, but they smell disgusting. Emmett, I heard my mother sigh in the background. "You getting off topic." "Right you are, Mom." The suspense is at an all-time peak as the teams await the whistle. No kidding, I wanted to scream. Personally, I was a nervous wreck. If I had been in the habit of biting my fingernails, I'd have none left by this point. Charlie was in a similar boat. His brow was sweaty, and he kept fidgeting with his hands. "Not tear worry," Hagrid told him with a cheerful pat to the back. Charlie blinked up at the enormous man, mesmerized by his size, but not so affected that it frightened him. The half-giant grinned and pointed to Bella. "She's a tough un, why no. If there's anyone that should be frightened, it's the Slytherins. If I add a galleon for every time Bella had put one o' them lads in the hospital wing, Gringotts would avenue a bloomin' hard time findin' a vault big enough." The police chief looked horrified, much to Hagrid's confusion. For Charlie's sake, I hoped that the subject would go no further, but Jacob argued that Bella wouldn't tee her to fly, which, naturally, was met by raucous laughter from Seamus and Dean. "Just you wait, mate," Seamus chortled. "Quidditch is always rough, but Gryffindor Slytherin is a whole other level. Save it until the final whistle, and then tell us that hell's bells wouldn't tee her to fly." My brother and sisters looked just as wary as Charlie and the Quileutes as we turned our gaze back down onto the pitch. By the looks of things, the chasers were each choosing an opponent. Viola had her sights set on Arachne, a tall, ebony-haired fifth year with wiry limbs, who shared the same pinched features as those of her twin brother, Octus. Ginny had chosen Harper, and Bella was busy staring down Blaise. She seemed to have applied a bit of makeup during her time in the changing rooms. I had a feeling that it was all just another sneaky tactic she was employing to give Gryffindor an advantage. Blaise harbored a secret crush for her after all, a fact that Bella was obviously exploiting. "I love it," Rosalie cackled lowly. "Poor Blaise. I almost feel sorry for him." Jasper shook his head. "She really does have no conscience when it comes to Quidditch, does she?" Nope. I would have loved to catch a glimpse of Bella's thoughts in that moment, but her mind was on complete lockdown, so, instead, I jumped into her rival's head, whose hidden emotion failed to match the aversion his countenance and body language suggested. Blaise's dark eyes were narrowed with feigned loathing as he directed them at Bella. "I've been waiting a long time for this, mudblood," he growled. "But, hell, she's beautiful." Bella threw back her head and laughed, thereby drawing attention to the creamy skin of her throat. "Oh, I know. Believe me, the feeling is completely mutual," she purred, once her laughter had died away. "There's a bed in the hospital wing with your name on it. If I am going, I am taking you with me." At Bella's suggestive wink, Blaise gawked like an idiot. The wolves too, all of whom heard the exchange over the roar of the arena, stared down at the pair in outright shock. When Jacob's eyes flitted to mine, I merely shrugged. Quidditch equals shameless strategies. The wolf scoffed. Now there's an understatement. Unfortunately for the Gryffindor chaser, her opponent quickly came to his senses. Come on, Blaise. You're not falling for this. This is how she plays. The wizard's eyes narrowed defiantly, and the realization that her scheme had failed caused a similar expression to creep onto Bella's face. With her flirtatious manner removed, cold ambition took its place. Now, called Madam Hooch, I shouldn't have to tell you to forget any dirty tricks you've planned for this match, but since this is Gryffindor versus Slytherin, I am going to do it anyway. I want a good, clean game. Is that understood? Not going to happen, thought Arachne, whose face was set with a permanent scowl. This is the year of the snake. Ooh, this is going to be juicy, ladies and gentlemen, Emmett chuckled as he surveyed the faces of the players. If looks could kill, we'd be out of a game right now. Goyle's nostrils are flaring so widely that the Gryffindors might end up mistaking them for the goal hoops. The wolves guffawed. Emmett, my mother cried. Mind you, his head is so round that they might mistake it for the quaffle. Emmett McCarty Cullen, or preferably, a bludger. Then Amicus or Jimmy can show us their swings. So help me, young man. I am a vampire and even I am having trouble telling the difference. Unless you're looking for summer voluntary work at the Seattle Home for the Elderly, Emmett, I suggest you wise up. If my brother could have blanched, he most certainly would have. Oh, and wad ya know, I had something in my eye. My mistake, ladies and gentlemen. It is most definitely a head. After the first few minutes of the bizarre commentary, Charlie threw me a look as if to say, is he for real? To which I responded with a shrug. I was beyond trying to understand Emmett's infantile ways. Obviously his observations today would be extremely biased, as they always were, but since it was his mission to rile up the Slytherins and give Gryffindor the advantage if only by a minuscule amount, I would continue to be grateful for his efforts. Besides, things were certainly more entertaining with Emmett commentating. The players mount their brooms, he said excitedly, while Madam Hooch prepares to release the balls. They resizing one another up. Look at those thighs all coiled to spring. God, this is tense. You going down, Swan, Blaise spat, eyes only for Bella, who sneered back in delight. You first. The sound of the whistle was lost in the roar of the audience. The players snarled as they launched into the air. And they off, screamed a joyous Emmett, barely able to contain himself. And holy hell, look at that. Violence in first 3 seconds of the game as Bella Swan and Ginny Weasley collide with Slytherin chasers Blaise Zabini and Matthew Harper. Sure enough, the rivals had done precisely that. To give their youngest players the best chance to seize the quaffle, the experienced players of both teams had purposefully slammed directly into their opponents. It all unfolded so quickly that Madam Hooch had no way of telling exactly what happened, but when Bella ducked away, Blaise was left sporting a bloody nose. Luckily, my eyesight was sharp enough that I didn't miss the subtle headbutt. Did she just do that? Rosalie wondered, totally flabbergasted. I can't believe she just did that. Edward, Saeed Jasper, calmly, something tells me the warnings about this match weren't exaggerated. No kidding, Sherlock. Emmett's cries continued to sound over the cheers of the students. The agile Viola Knight beats Arachne Blackhand to the ball, snatching it from the air and nimbly dodging her opponent. Ginny Weasley and Swan are hot on her tail as she soars towards the Slytherin hoops, joining her in the arrowhead formation. Harper looks as if he's in pain as he rolls along the pitch like a beer keg after falling off his broom. Zabini, too, is out of the game for now as he descends to ground level to get his busted nose fixed before he passes out from blood loss. What a pansy. My mother's growls sounded in the background. Once again, my brother grinned. The men, ahem girly boys. Emmett, pardon me, small case of itstruitus. The boys have been put to shame by the women, who clearly have more guts and talent in one little finger than. After the last 2 Gryffindor games, Esme had prepared for what she called Emmett's inappropriate commentary, and whacked my brother around the head with a metal baseball bat. Although left unhurt, Emmett took the hint. All right, Slytherin is left with only one chaser as the ambitious efforts to take the Gryffindor girls out of the game backfire. Viola rockets towards the keeper, defended by her teammates on either side. Graham Pritchard looks nervous, and rightly so. Here comes Knight. She's in range. She shoots and score. 10 points to Gryffindor. Pritchard never had a chance. An army of fists shot into the air as 3/4 of the audience roared in delight. With the first 10 points secured in less than 20 seconds, the Gryffindors, Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs were completely encouraged. Victory was in no way impossible. Rosalie flung her arm over my shoulder as she cheered, and I returned the gesture, hugging her to my side in brotherly fashion. "Hell yeah," cried Jared, executing a fist pump. "Woo." Jacob turned to grin at Charlie, whose cheeks were flushed with excitement. "That was seriously awesome." "Awesome," nodded Bella's dad. "Looks like the Slytherins are complaining to the referee," Emmett noted crossly as Malfoy and Harper argued with Madame Hooch. Of course, anyone with a pair of eyes would say there are no grounds to disallow the goal. I was inclined to agree with my brother, not because I was totally biased, which I was, but because I knew full well that the Slytherins were just as guilty when it came to blatching. The Gryffindors might have started the game with the intent to collide, but so had their rivals. As far as I was concerned, the fouls cancelled each other out. Madame Hooch seemed to be of the same opinion, because she allowed the goal, subsequently receiving a chorus of cheers from the Gryffindor supporters. The ball is back in play now. Arachne Blackhand to Harper, Harper to Zabini. Here comes Ginny Weasley, heading straight for Blaise, who drops low to avoid the hit anew. Clearly not low enough, ladies and gents, because the witch seems to have accidentally kicked the poorly coordinated wizard right in the sniffer. That S2 to Gryffindor, nil to Zabini's nose. Your turn next, Viola. Emmett. Sorry, Mom, not. Ooh, and it looks like I am not the only one getting a telling off. Madame Hooch awards a penalty to Slytherin for Ginny's foul. Here's the first test for her brother. Come on, Ron, who, according to legend, never lets the quaffle in. As planned, my brother's words, like a match to gunpowder, instantly propelled the Gryffindors, Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs into united song. Weasley can save anything. He never leaves a single ring. That's why Gryffindors all sing, "Weasley is our king." The students continued to chant as Harper prepared to take the penalty. Ron hovered steadily in front of the center hoop, and locked stairs with the Slytherin chaser, whose chest was rapidly rising and falling, a product of increased adrenaline. Rosalie's grip was so forceful that it would have crushed a human to pieces had she instead been embracing a mortal. As things were, I was just as anxious for the Gryffindor keeper, and clutched her just as tightly. This is it. Harper speeds forwards left or right. He shoots right, and so does Ron. The score remains 10-0 to Gryffindor. Hell yeah, the wolves screamed in unison, while I high-fived my sister. Our heads turned to Hermione, who was grinning like a Cheshire cat, brown eyes twinkling brightly as she stared up at Ron. Wow, amazing. Hermione, he's a keeper. The witch chuckled at her own joke. Her boyfriend, meanwhile, was conducting the crowds with a wave of his arms as they continued to sing the Weasley victory song. And that, everyone, Emmett grinned, is why Weasley is our king. Keep 'em coming, Ron. The quaffle is back in play again. Knight to Swan. Swan soars over Harper, but ducks low at the last second and gives the Slytherin player the tail end of her broom. Looks like Harper can TC. Charlie's eyes were the size of golf balls as we watched the scene unfold. His daughter had soared over her opponent's head, but descended quickly at the last second. The twigs making up her tail of her broom had subsequently scratched Harper across the face as he turned, getting him right in the eyes. Madame Hooch had to help the injured player down to the pitch, because he couldn't make anything out through his watery vision. Swan to Ginny Weasley. She crosses the center line, and here come the Slytherins. Ginny to Swan anew. My fingers tightened on the rail as Bella took a bludger to the head. It only clipped her left temple, but the blow was hard enough that it left a bloody cut. Swans flies forwards, looking dazed. Holy hell, please don't fall off your broom, Bella. Knight catches up with her, ready to take the ball. Jimmy Peaks sends a bludger in the right direction, scattering the Slytherins, who quickly recover and soar towards Knight, aware that Swan will have to what's this. Up in the sky, Bella's velocity rocketed. Ha, Rosalie grinned. What a sneak. She was faking it. Swan speeds her advance with a smile that says it all. My brother laughed. The Slytherins have no way of catching the Gryffindor trickster, whom, it appears, is not about to have a concussion. She zooms towards the Slytherin hoops, where Pritchard looks like he's about to wet himself. The entire stadium seemed to inhale at precisely the same moment as Bella flew forwards, her teeth bared in an elated, yet slightly sadistic, grin, the quaffle neatly tucked under her arm. "Come on, Bella," screamed Charlie. "You can do it," Jacob cried. "Kill him," Alice shrieked, hanging as far over the rail as Jasper would allow. "Will she? 1T she. This is it." Swan swoops in, looking fierce, eyes on the prize, AAAND, score. Emmett raved fanatically. That's 20-0 to Gryffindor. The mischievous Bella Swan takes the second goal of the game. Charlie and the Quileutes were squealing like girls for a full minute following Bella's latest triumph. Her father and Seth had their arms around one another, and bounced giddily on the spot like they were trying to take off. They looked like a couple of pogo sticks, and I couldn't help but laugh at the sight. My eyes found my empathic brother, who was obviously feeding off the excitement of the crowd. He and his tiny lover caught my gaze, and together, we each executed a satisfying fist pump. There were more opportunities for these as the game went on. Gryffindor continued to outplay Slytherin in every respect, and the Reds managed to secure 80 points before their opponents scored any. Draco realized that his team needed to up their game. The match had only been going for 30 minutes, and already a victory from Gryffindor seemed possible. "This is getting embarrassing," he spat at Blaise, swooping down from his high position. "At this rate, they'll be in a position to catch the snitch and win." "Do something." "Like what?" "I don't know. Anything. Whatever it takes to win. You up against a bunch of girls for crying out loud. Put them out of the game for all I care. Just do it." And with that, he retreated back to his earlier position, his stare flicking briefly to Harry, who was lost in deep concentration. Malfoy's orders caused my insides to sizzle. The only thing holding back the guttural snarl contained in my chest was the knowledge that Bella was more than capable of defending herself on a broom. I hoped she'd go all out to give the Slytherins precisely what they deserved. It's war on the Quidditch pitch, ladies and gentlemen. A cheating Octus attempts to take out Ginny Weasley with a swing of his bat, but fails to notice the bludger sent at him by Amicus Fortison. Octus takes a hit to the shoulder and subsequently bashes into his twin sister, Arachne. This gives Ginny an opening. She storms the pitch, passing to Neo, but the quaffle is intercepted by Zabini. Zabini hurtles back down the pitch, along the left side, with only a beater and the keeper to stop him. Yet here comes Swan, rocketing towards him at a wicked 150. Can Zabini make it in time? 10 feet ahead of Bella, 40 from the scoring area. Swan comes in quick. She's hot on him now. The players are level. My heart was in my stomach. I could barely stand to watch, yet I couldn't look away either. All of a sudden, the Gryffindor chaser zoomed forwards and swerved to the left, not actually colliding with her opponent, but shocking him enough to have an effect. The move was so swift and unexpected that Blaise swerved too, terrified of a collision. With no time to break, Blaise's trajectory meant that he had nowhere to go but into the stands. Reflexively, his hand snatched the firebolt's handle, knuckles turning white as he took her down with him. Foul. That was a foul if ever I saw one. Emmett bellowed. What a dirty move. Do him for blurting, ref. Like my enraged brother, the Wolves, Charlie, and my siblings snarled viciously at the game's most recent development. I, meanwhile, was shrieking profanities, completely unable to contain my fury. The students screamed and scattered as the flyers went plummeting down together. I stared on in horror as Bella collided with the wooden railing alongside her enemy. It splintered with the force of the impact, snapping instantly, leaving nothing else between my mate and the bleachers. She crashed against the floor with a grunt. The surrounding students' Ravenclaws, thankfully winced in unison as her face smacked into the wood. Jasper struggled to restrain the death pixie as she battled against his hold. Her eyes were crazed and she cackled like a psychopath. He's a dead man. A dead man. Let me at him. I am gonna shove his head where the sun don't shine. No, you're not. Oh, yes I am. Gonads for earrings I tell you. Jasper groaned. Sweet Lord. Bella seemed to share my sister's attitude. Through the eyes of Terry Boot, I watched as she spat out a mouthful of blood in her newly grown molar. Savage flames danced behind the gold of her eyes as she stared down at her lost tooth. She looked so incredibly irate as she snatched it up from the coalescing pool of crimson fluid that I feared spontaneous combustion. God damn it, she roared, turning on her rival. I only just got that. Through a newly battered nose, which was once again bleeding profusely, Blaze snorted. His laughter was clearly the final straw as far as Bella was concerned, because a primitive scream suddenly broke free of her chest, and she launched herself at the boy, impatient for violence. What the? You going to pay for this? Arg. Madame Hooch swooped in from the sky then, like a hawk locked onto its target. Unfortunately, the Ravenclaws were gathered so tightly, eager as they were to watch the scuffle play out, that the referee couldn't see or reach the two injured chasers, who were both currently seeing red. What's going on here? You move aside. What's going on? I shouldn't like this. Blaze thought as Bella struggled above him, straddling his hips, and she gripped the collar of his sweater. A snarl ripped up my throat, not only because he was thinking too much about how closely her body was pressed against his, but also because he abruptly aimed a forceful punch to her gut. Bella grunted, and kneed him where it hurt. Luckily, she had time to speedily roll to one side before Madame Hooch could break through the line of excited teenagers. What's going on here? The teacher demanded, her yellow gaze shifting from one player to the other. When she caught sight of Blaze, who had scrunched himself into a tight ball and was whimpering like a puppy, she shook her head and tutted. Oh dear, looks like you had a poor landing, Zabini. The wizard moaned and pointed to Bella. Now, don't blame Swan for this. That move was perfectly sound. You the one who committed the foul. You know full well you not meant to grab another player's broom. Come on, let us get you off to sick bay. Madame Pomfrey can have a look at you while Swan takes a penalty. Panic sparked in Blaze's eyes as the witch went to help him up. Frantically, he shook his head and pointed to Bella again, desperately attempting to convey his meaning. Swan, if you feel well enough to take the shot, I suggest you get yourself back in the air, otherwise, follow me down. That's all right, Madame Hooch. I think I'll be okay. The referee nodded. Bella's gentle smile gave nothing away. The moment the teacher had her back turned, however, the fake layer of innocence dissolved, leaving in its place a grin both wicked and victorious, one with the power to set her rival seething. The witch waved unrepentantly as Blaze glared at her from over his shoulder, before taking off after Madame Hooch. Emmett's chortling filled the arena as the commotion came to an end. Not exactly sure what happened there, he chuckled. Bella seems to have lost another tooth, but she'll no doubt be able to regrow it later. Zabini and the Slytherins look sour as she shoots into the air to take a penalty for Gryffindor, following the atrocious foul committed by the rival chaser. After passing the fuming chaser off to the school nurse, whose presence was a result of the recent lack of student casualties, Madame Hooch soared back into the air to referee the game. Pritchard once again looks shaky on his broom, Emmett commented, unlike his opponent, who, despite her recent injuries, seems hungrier for victory than ever. Unable to breathe, much like my brother and sisters, I waited for Bella to take the shot. In the flurry of chanting and waving fans, we stood stock still, as durable and immobile as ancient speleothems. Charlie adopted a stance reminiscent of a man of devout faith. With clasped hands tucked beneath his chin, his lips trembled in silent prayer, thus providing a very clear contrast between himself and his youthful companions, whose bellowing cries overpowered many of the cheers and screams of the surrounding humans. Up in the air, Bella tensed. Ever so slightly, she leaned forwards on her broom, the subtle shift revealing the ridges of her shoulder blades. To anyone with less than perfect eyesight, the adjustment would seem innocent enough. A vampire, however, would not mistake the cat-like movement, nor the ruthless golden stare, for anything less than the resolve of a waking predator. The claws were out, and Pritchard was prey. It's white knuckles for Gryffindor and Slytherin players alike now, folks, Emmett observed as Madame Hooch blew her whistle. And the ref's given the go-ahead off-speed. Swan Pritchard trembles. Swan shoots. Yeah, my sister squealed in my ear. I blinked in a daze. Over to the left, a few of the wolves had decided they'd had enough of their clothes. Booyah! A bare-chested Jared cried, waving a red flannel shirt above his head like a flag. That's what I am talking about. Embry followed suit, but his attention quickly turned to Luna, who was far too immersed in the asparagus-shaped cloud to realize he was flexing for her benefit. Charlie patted me roughly on the back, forgetting the potential injuries he could earn as a result. I was far too elated to think to apologize when he subsequently winced, and continued to grin manically up at my fiancée as she looped past the Blackhand twins and a scowling Goyle. Another awesome shot by Bella Swan, my brother chuckled. Was there ever any doubt? Of course not. Gryffindor lead with 90 points to 10. Ha, another 30 points and Potter will be able to go after the snitch. Come on, girls, thought Harry, staring down at his team from a superior altitude. Emmett's reminder of the score seemed to give the Slytherins the motivation they'd been lacking. Just as Viola was about to score another goal for Gryffindor, Harper shot up from ground level like a speeding rocket and intercepted the quaffle. From there, it went to Arachne, then to Blaise, who passed back to Harper before dodging a bludger sent by Jimmy Peaks. Goyle swung for Ginny to throw her off course, leaving only Viola and Bella in the chaser's path. He zoomed towards them similarly. They charged in his direction. The other Slytherins joined his advance, before speeding ahead to cut off the girls. They going to crash. Jacob screeched, grabbing Charlie's arm. Bella's father blanched, his mouth agape. Rosalie's vice-like grip almost crushed my hand as we watched the scene unfold. Viola threw an unsure glance at her teammate. What do we do? Don't pull out. Bella screamed over the whoosh of the wind. We better. Yes, you are, Emmett cried, egging them on, much to the confusion of every other human. Broken bones, remember, broken bones. Indeed, Slytherin had upped their game, but would Gryffindor fail to meet the challenge? PFF'd. The chasers sped. Closer and closer they came to collision. 3 against 2, and here comes Peaks and Fortison plus the Slytherin beaters, all ready to join their teammates. The Slytherins speed over the center line. With her hair flaring out wildly behind her, my screaming Bella pulled away from her team, pushing the firebolt as fast as it would go. Harper shrieked when he realized she wouldn't pull up, but Bella had no intention of crashing into the boy. She shot to the left at the very last second, but not before throwing a punch at the quaffle, forcing it from Harper's grip. Stupid mudblood, Octus screeched, slamming his bat into the handle of Bella's broom as she passed. Two things happened then. The good news: Ginny dived as the quaffle plunged through the air, intercepting it for Gryffindor. The horrid news: Bella's broom was propelled into a spin, with her still on it. Like a Catherine wheel, the girl went whirling chaotically through the air, her features a blur as she lost all control. Futile screams issued from the nearby Gryffindors as they pleaded with the witch to hold on, the terror suspended. Only my brother stood a chance of being heard though. Come on, Bells, you control the broom. Not the other way around. Use the force, he growled. What the hell is he going on about? Seamus frowned, momentarily distracted by Emmett's inane command. Up in the sky though, a peal of high, ringing laughter shattered the heavy trepidation. Bella's hands tightened on the firebolt's handle, commanding it to increase its speed, until the thrust was so great that it blasted her out of the deadly rotations. Relief and delight swept through the crowds of Gryffindors, Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs as the witch executed a graceful turn in midair, grinning like a hungry shark as her eyes landed on the enemy chasers. Swan regains control of her broom, Emmett blared, just in time to assist Ginny and Viola, who are currently being pursued by the angry Slytherin chasers. The firebolt whistled as it cut through the air, surging ever faster towards the others. Ginny and Viola beamed as their teammate flew to defend them. Nice one, Bella, Ginny cried, passing the ball to Viola, before turning to join the attack. Viola, on the other hand, powered on ahead towards Pritchard while her comrades hurtled in the opposite direction. With a thundering shout, Amicus cracked his bat against an oncoming bludger, a gift from Goyle, sending it straight for Arachne, who howled as it smashed into her left shoulder. In the same moment, Ginny swerved in front of Blaise, who subsequently veered off course, while Bella sped towards Harper. When the players were level, Bella decided to make use of an old trick. The lioness erupted to the surface, her teeth fully displayed as her lips curled back in fury, through which there ripped an ear-splitting roar. Harper yelped. In his terror, he swerved abruptly, forgetting about the tower that lay directly to the right. He yelled again as he realized what he'd done, but was silenced a second later when he crashed into the structure. Emmett was enraptured by the whole thing. He looked joyous. Viola speeds towards the Slytherin hoops, completely unobstructed after her teammates take out the opposition. There's no one to challenge her now except Pritchard, and let's face it, he's a bit of a drip. Watch it, Emmett, my mother growled. Much like Goyle. Emmett, sorry, Mom, you're right, I was wrong. Goyle is more like Shrek. I am warning you. For those of you who don't know, Shrek is a fat ogre. That is it. Detention. Might as well say what I like now then and score. Emmett laughed. Exactly as I thought. Bella and Ginny high-five as little Viola takes another 10 points for Gryffindor. Nothing made sense anymore. The world had been tipped on its axes otherwise. Why would Jasper and I be squealing like excited schoolgirls, giggling profusely, while Rosalie and Alice directed vulgar chants at the Slytherin quarter of the arena? And the quaff arrrrrrrrrrrrgh. Malfoy has spotted the snitch. My brother shrieked, triggering a chorus of gasps from the spectators, and then, like the ripples of an atomic blast, pandemonium exploded through the stadium, forcing the chaotic gamut of human emotion upon the watching crowds. Untainted horror battled against the hopeful screams of the Slytherins as Gryffindors, Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs cried out in united panic. Stop him! Alice and Jared screeched in unison as Draco plunged towards the tiny golden ball hovering just behind Amicus' right ear. No, no, no! Harry panicked, racing after his rival. Up in the sky, the other players were motionless. They watched in frozen silence as Draco threw out his hand, grinning like a madman and surging ever closer to victory. For the smallest flash of time, Amicus resembled a trembling fawn, his hazel eyes wide with alarm as he stared up at the Seeker hurtling towards him with insane velocity, and then, as if a switch had been flipped behind the beater's eyes, that childish uncertainty morphed into something great and inspiring. His mind was a black hole, far too powerful to resist. I welcomed the pull, and allowed myself to be sucked into his thoughts, through which I saw everything play out from the best possible angle. Amicus detected the fluttering by his ear. He saw the flaming excitement in Draco's eyes. He tasted the suffocating fear of his peers as it pressed in on him from all sides. More importantly, he felt the heavy weight of his team's expectations. He felt that same expectation forcing back his arm until it was raised high in the air. He felt it ripple through every sinew of tissue like an electric current, commanding him to grip his bat that little bit tighter. Mine. Draco grinned, 5 meters from the snitch. Amicus sneered. Not today, mate. And with that, he swung his bat through the air, smashing it into Draco's reaching arm. The wizard grunted, dropping it to his side in shock as he gritted his teeth against the sharp pain. I winced when one collided with the other, but Amicus was utterly free of regret, regardless of his body's protests as he and Malfoy tumbled onto the grassy pitch together. Harry pulled up a second later, and the glittering ball zoomed away, making itself invisible once again to the eyes of the humans. Madame Hooch looked as if she'd been pumped full of Botox when she swooped in from the skies. Her jaw was locked tighter than a vice, and her eyes were so incredibly wide that the white around her irises was completely visible. You've got some explaining to do, Fortison. What on earth was that? Amicus groaned, rubbing his head. Self-defense. PFF'd. I am not an idiot, Fortison. That was a terrible stunt you just pulled. Work though, chuckled Emmett. I've no choice but to penalize you, the referee announced, grabbing her whistle. A penalty to Slytherin. The Slytherins weren't satisfied with Hooch's decision, and demanded that she announce them the winners after the obvious display of cheating. However, the witch dismissed their protests with a flick of her hand, and responded with a mere "that's Quidditch," much to the displeasure of the Greengrass sisters, who were using their wands to catapult conjured bricks at Gryffindor flyers. The only thing that stopped their tirade was Madame Hooch's threat to award a penalty to Gryffindor. That didn't put an end to the Slytherins' displeasure though, so when Zabini managed to score for his team, successfully putting the quaffle through the left hoop, his achievement was only met with mild applause. Good Amicus, Hagrid clapped, his eyes on the smiling beater, who had once again taken to the air. Although, he's not that small anymore, is he? Shootin' up like a bean pole, that young un is. I'll bet 5 galleons he's captain in a couple o' years. I don't doubt you, I responded, without taking my eyes off the boy in question. Aside from a nasty graze above his right eye, he looked fine, though the same couldn't be said for Draco, who looked as if he'd been force-fed sour grapes. The score was 100 points to 20, giving Gryffindor an 80-point lead. The team needed to increase that by 30 points before Harry could catch the snitch, so the pressure was still on. Ginny was the next to score. The chasers continued to pass the ball, swerving like eagles as they fought their way past the enemy players and dodged oncoming bludgers. Charlie's teary eyes glittered in the light of the sun, harnessing its warmth as his daughter scored again for her team. With only 10 points needed to equalize, the girls chose their moment to unleash Gryffindor's secret weapon. Night thunders down the pitch, the quaffle tucked neatly under her arm. The Slytherin chasers are heading straight for her, and in sweep Ginny and Swan with Fortison and Peaks. Their flight was precise. Like fighter jets, they surged across the sky, the air cheering as they cut through it. The sound was coupled with gasps of amazement as the 5 players flew in perfect synchronization, Bella and Ginny spiraling around the youngest chaser, while the beaters covered the front and rear. Ladies and gentleWizards, my brother screamed, the Kobe corkscrew. The Slytherins were just as flabbergasted as the rest of us. None of the players knew how to react to the practiced move. They couldn't get to the quaffle, not unless they managed to get a bludger past Jimmy or Amicus. Harper tried to break the ranks with a charge, but he didn't have the courage to follow through, and halted in mid-air while the Gryffindors torpedoed down the pitch. A second before Viola reached the scoring area, the others pulled away, nimbly flipping out of their formation. The roar of the Gryffindors was incredible as little Viola flung the quaffle past Pritchard, who accidentally crashed into one of the hoops. I barely registered the fact that I was bouncing up and down like a pogo stick. I couldn't have cared less how ridiculous I looked, nor could my sisters or brother, or Charlie, or the wolves, or the witches and wizards standing nearby. Seamus was so excited that he grabbed Jared's face and placed a big wet kiss on his cheek. Jared looked horrified. "That's how you do it," Seth cried, waving his shirt. Emmett seemed to agree. "As you lot say, that was bloody brilliant. It's a level playing field now as Viola Knight clinches the crucial goal for her team, aided by the superb flying skills of Bella Swan and Ginny Weasley." "They did it, Edward," Rosalie grinned, squeezing my shoulder. "They actually did it." I nodded, speechless. If only Alice had lost her tongue too. "Gryffindor till I die. Gryffindor till I die. I know I am. I am sure I am. Gryffindor till I die." It didn't stop there either. "You thought you had us down, boys. What's with the sad frowns, boys? You Witherin, poor Slytherin. You so don't have us down." There were some that she even managed to get others to sing along to, not that it was difficult to learn the words. They just needed the correct tune. Gryffindor, Gryffindor, Gryffindor. Gryffindor, Gryffindor, Gryffindor. Gryffindor, Gryffindor, Gryffindor. Gryffindor, 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 Gryffindor. And so it went on. Slytherin tried to compete with their own chants, but they were like whispers under static, and were completely overwhelmed by the combined efforts of Gryffindor, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. The songs were like energy, spells in their own right. The longer they went on, the more they nourished the red-robed players. Physical fatigue had no hold on them, it was washed away by the music created by the spectators. Charlie sang louder than anyone, but he certainly had some competition. Seamus, Dean and Neville were doing a decent job, and stood with their arms cast over one another's shoulders. Lavender Brown, who was standing 2 rows in front with Bale Wishart, demonstrated high levels of enthusiasm, too, her high voice easily discernible in the din. With her boyfriend's arms wrapped around her waist, she swayed from side to side, her arms stroking the air above her. 5 additional goals were scored in the next 15 minutes. The Slytherin players were furious. They took 20 points for their team, resorting to the most ignoble means possible. The Gryffindors gave as good as they got, of course. Beaters' bats were flying everywhere, limbs were thrown this way and that in an attempt to injure other players, and 4 out of 5 goals were a result of penalties. The chasers, beaters, and keepers had done their part, it seemed. They had been playing for 2¼ hours, and now everyone, whether Gryffindor or Slytherin, was counting on the Seekers to bring it home. I scanned the arena for signs of the snitch, searching for the molten glimmer that would indicate its whereabouts. 20 meters to the left of the center line, a sudden sparkle caught my attention. There it was, fluttering lazily 40 feet above the emerald pitch, reflecting the brilliant summer light. Regardless of space and setting, it was always easy for any vampire to locate a snitch. Our eyesight was so developed that detection was never a problem for us. Beside me, Rosalie worried her lip as she watched Harry. The Gryffindor captain was looking in the wrong direction, his eyes wandering over the other half of the field, unlike Draco, who surged forwards all of a sudden, diving like an eagle after his prize. As Emmett began raving once more, propelled into hysterical screams by the alerted seeker, all other players aside from Harry came to an abrupt halt. This time, no one obstructed Draco's line of flight. Bella was the closest, suspended in mid-air 20 feet from the snitch, the quaffle tucked tightly beneath her arm. I saw her eyes land on the lightning-quick Slytherin, practically a blur as white blonde merged into green, and marveled as gold bled out from her narrowing black pupils. The shift in her mind was the slightest imaginable, but even so, it was enough. The sudden crack in her shield allowed me entrance, and I certainly didn't hesitate. The quaffle slid from Bella's grasp, just as her vision snapped to the snitch. When she realized the difference in distance between Harry and Draco, her stomach lurched. He'll never make it. Oh, no, Rosalie groaned, sensing defeat. Hermione shrieked, her face a mask of horror. Bella, look out. Everything happened so fast after that. Bella realized the problem in the same moment that I did. Just as Draco thundered after the snitch, a bludger was heading straight for her. She had just enough time to move out of the way to fly out of the missile's path, but she didn't. Instead, she froze, and my heart dropped like a brick. Yes, cried Draco, so close now. But Bella was looking the other way, her eyes on the bludger. Jasper gasped beside me, his mouth falling open. Mine did the same when I realized why. What I had mistaken for fear in those big golden orbs was something else entirely. Determination. One of Bella's hands gripped her broom, the other swung back behind her head. Draco was 20 feet from the snitch. Bella smiled. 15 feet now. Bella screamed. 10 feet from success. Bella swung. Her feral roar ripped through the air like a war cry as she threw her arm forward into the path of the merciless bludger. A painful crunch and a snap clawed suddenly at my ears as the side of her fist smashed into the ball, sending it flying back in a new direction. 5 feet from the end was when it all came crashing gloriously down for Draco Malfoy and Slytherin House. The bludger slammed into his side, the sheer force of the impact blasting him sideways as easily as it would a bowling pin. The window was there, and in swept Harry, sapphires for eyes as he threw out his hand for the very last time, snatching the snitch from the air. One moment of calm, then madness erupted. Suddenly, I was plummeting down into a sea of euphoria. All around me, tidal waves of jubilation and wonder were crashing in as the students of Hogwarts threw up their arms in celebration, screaming and cheering and crying all at once, every single one of them watching in awe as the red capes converged on the girl who had made all of it possible, the girl who had catapulted Gryffindor to victory. Victory! They did it! Came Emmett's rapturous booms, while Ron almost suffocated Bella, ensnaring her in a death hug. They did it! Harry Potter catches the snitch for Gryffindor, after a sensational contribution from his teammate, who knocked Draco Malfoy out of the sky with a valiant new move. Ladies and gentle wizards, I give you the Hand of Swan. Hand of Swan, that was what they were saying. It was the only thing I could hear. Hand of Swan, Hand of Swan, Hand of Swan, Hand of Swan. So it went on. The Gryffindors and Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs were dazzled by Bella's fearless performance, and continued to chant the words over and over in honor of the witch, who was currently cradling her damaged hand as she descended from the sky with her teammates. When her feet touched the ground, Harry and Ron dived at her together, lifting her up onto their shoulders to present her to the frenzied audience. Harry gripped her tightly by the knee as he looked up at her. "Don't take this the wrong way or anything, but I seriously love you." "Love her?" Ron laughed, adding his penny to the pot. "Woman, we worship you. I bow down to your infinite brilliance." Despite the agony she must have been experiencing, Bella giggled. The Slytherin players were already leaving the pitch, too resentful following their stolen victory to watch the proceedings. The Gryffindor team, on the other hand, gladly soaked up the adoration. Whether from the pain in her fist, or from the heightened emotion of winning her final game, Bella's eyes were swimming behind a film of tears. Her smile was tight, and she was clearly gritting her teeth, but her euphoria was evident, and seemed to cast a visible aura about her. That was awesome, Bella. Ginny squealed, clutching her friend's cape. I could kiss you for it. Her hand, said Viola. I want to kiss her hand. Me first, cried Amicus. And so they did. Bella laughed and blushed as she was lowered to the ground, and one by one, every member of the team bent to kiss the reason for their success. Charlie seemed to have no words. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed each time he tried to gulp back his swelling emotion. If pride had had the properties of helium, he would have floated away by now. The wolves, too, were eager to let everyone know about their association with the match heroine, especially Jacob. That's my best friend. That's my best friend. Embry winked at Luna, and pointed down at Bella. I taught her that. My body tensed as something launched at my back, but I relaxed when I recognized the minds and scents of Seamus and Dean. My nose scrunched automatically as 2 wet kisses were placed on either side of my face. Those are for your woman, Edward. Pass 'em on, mate. After wiping my face with the back of my sleeve, I threw them both an amused smile. You know, I am starting to think you two have the hots for me. Seamus snorted. Sorry, but I prefer blondes. And then I was being lifted off the ground without warning, after my tiny sister decided to lock me in a bear hug. The first time we play vampire baseball with your future wife, she's going to be on my team. I want in too, Rosalie laughed. Alice beamed. It's settled then. Girls versus boys. Jasper smirked and shook his head as the 2 females danced away from us, their arms linked as they followed the crowds out of the stands, cheering Hand of Swan as they went. Down on the pitch, the Gryffindor players were making their way towards the changing rooms, waving as they walked towards the exit. Bella's eyes had once again transformed into cups of molten gold. Her mind told me that she was searching for my face. When her gaze finally connected with mine, everything seemed to click into place. My world was a bizarre jigsaw, and all the pieces were exactly where they were meant to be, sliding together in perfect harmony. Only one piece was missing now, but I would find it soon. I had everything I needed. At some point, I would have to find a way to bring up the subject of babies. Granted, I couldn't tell Bella about Renesmee, but the Sphinx's spell wouldn't prevent me from discussing children in general. I decided then that I would ask Bella about the life she had initially pictured for herself. I needed to know if children had featured in that. What if they hadn't though? Would I let that stop me? I shook my head in an attempt to clear it, and grinned down at the radiant witch. Before she disappeared into the changing rooms, she winked and blew me a kiss, resulting in a wolf whistle from Jasper, who was feeling playful after prolonged exposure to the Quileutes. Together, my brother and I headed after the girls, the 2 of us eager to watch the march back to the castle. Charlie and the wolves followed us down to the exit, where we met up with Esme, Carlise and Emmett, the last of whom couldn't stop talking about Bella's final move, not that I minded. Actually, he sounded a bit like a sports critic, reeling off one adjective after another. Amazing. Superb. Absolutely astounding. The students certainly seemed to agree. When the players emerged from the changing rooms, they were greeted by euphoric cheers. The witches and wizards didn't miss a beat. They immediately hoisted Bella and her friends into the air, screaming in delight as began their journey back to the castle. Bella was being carried by Seamus, Dean, Terry Boot and Bale Wishart. Her hand was newly mended, and I guessed that Madame Pomfrey had already performed her handiwork. In her arms she cradled a large trophy, the Quidditch Cup. Oi, Swan. Bella turned her head, alerted by Emmett's booming voice. He gave her the thumbs up and grinned. That's what I call broken bones. Thanks, coach, she called back, before showing him her fist. Broken bones. I left the others behind then. Somehow, I managed to fight my way into the throng, past all the students desperate to touch the hand of Swan, until I was right beneath her, supporting her weight with those closest. Trust you, Bella, I whispered in her ear. Who else would pull a stunt like that? She chuckled in response. I really wanted to win. I gathered that. I've never met anyone as tenacious as you. Bella laughed again, but didn't challenge my observation. Instead, she closed her eyes and contented herself with listening to the rhythmic chanting. One thing was certain, they would be talking about Bella Swan for years to come. They all love her, and so did I. Bella said goodbye to the wolves and her father once we arrived back at the castle. They were waiting for her on the 5th floor, inside Carlisle and Esme's office. There, she was hugged by everyone, except Paul, who settled with patting her on the back. Charlie thanked me again for enabling their visit, and demanded that he be invited to the next vampire baseball match. That's something I definitely want to see. Are you sure you want to ruin normal baseball for yourself, Dad? Absolutely. I watch far too much television. Edward, you'll let me know when the next game is happening. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, I grinned. Charlie arched an eyebrow. Edward, seriously, you can drop this sir stuff. I really don't care that you eat lions. Okay, my daughter becoming a lion kind of puts things in perspective. Dad, I am just saying. Alright, Charlie, as long as you don't try to eat her when she's a lion, he emphasized. I can tell the difference, I promised. With that, and a few additional words of congratulations for his daughter, Charlie departed, confidently striding into the emerald flames of the fireplace. I think your father is developing an appreciation for the Flow network, Bella, Jasper said on our way back to the common room. He seemed excited about using it. Bella nodded. He's been using it a lot lately. He's had a new fireplace put in especially. The closer we came to Gryffindor House, the louder the chanting became. It was so loud that it vibrated down through the walls of the grand staircase. We must have stopped a dozen times on our way there, because the portrait people were all eager to convey their admiration. They'd heard about the match from passing students. The fat lady was especially delighted, and even after we passed through, I heard her shout, "She's one of mine." The roar that greeted us was immense. Party poppers were being brandished in every corner of the room, and from them spewed fountains of different colored bubbles, all aimed in Bella's direction. The students hadn't tired of their chant, and picked up where they left off. Over here, Bells, Ron cried, waving from his place by the stairs. He held the cup while Harry poured in one bottle after another of Madame Rosmerta's butter beer. You first. The students shuffled aside to allow Bella room to move. They reached out as she passed, the tips of their fingers skimming her right hand. Those too far back to reach her were happy to clap and keep up the chant. When she reached the front, Ron offered her the trophy. He patted her on the back, and winked. Bottoms up, Bells. She laughed, and was just about to take a swig, but was interrupted by the call of the students, who had switched their shout from hand of swan to speech, speech, speech. Bella looked imploringly at the Quidditch captain, but he merely laughed and shrugged. It's you they want. Me, but I don't know how to make speeches. She whispered. Ginny nudged her forward. You'll willingly break your hand, but are too afraid to speak up. Come on, Bella. Staring out at the waiting crowd, the witch blushed until her face was as red as a tomato. Bless, thought Emmett, barely containing a cackle. With a gesture from Ron, the other students began to settle down, each of them waiting with excited faces for Bella to indulge their desire for a final speech. It was only after my empathic brother began pumping the uncertain girl with all the confidence he could conjure that she finally opened her mouth to speak. I haven't prepared anything, so, I guess I'll just wing it. Bella coughed, shuffling her feet as her eyes roamed the expectant crowd. As you all know, this is my last year at Hogwarts. It's one section of my life that all of us, I think, will be sad to let go of. The older students, all those who would not be returning in September, murmured their agreement. Bella seemed to take courage from that. Her back straightened a little more, and she squared her shoulders. When I stepped off the Hogwarts Express all those years back, I didn't really know what to expect. If you'd told me back then that there was a sport I might be fairly good at, I probably would have laughed in your face. At this, the room filled with the sound of gentle laughter. I smiled. As it is, Quidditch was one of the best things that ever happened to me, amongst other things, of course. My grin grew wider as she threw me a quick wink. I learned so much, down there on that pitch. In sports, in life, these games we play, winning is important. Sure, I am not going to deny that, but there's so much more to it. It's about teamwork, about working towards a common purpose, about wanting something so badly that it makes your bones hurt, and doing anything and everything you can to make it happen. I didn't need to be a mind reader to sense the shift in mood. I had a feeling that Bella wasn't simply talking about the match now. That said, after 5 years at Quidditch, 7 years at magic and 18 years at life. Here's to broken bones and losing teeth, she smiled, earning a small cheer from her audience. To fireworks in the exam hall. The applause grew louder as the students remembered the noble efforts of the Weasley twins. To fireworks on the stairs, for that matter, Bella smirked. This time, it was Seamus and Dean's turns to blush. The cheering increased in intensity as, one by one, the witches and wizards were acknowledged for their bravery. To killing snakes, secret meetings, playing chess, and saying no. To fire in my blood, portable swamps, trips to Italy and I must not tell lies. Harry smiled, nodding his head in silent thanks while Ron and Hermione patted him on the back. Bella fell silent then, looking out at all the friends she had lived and fought beside. Happiness and sadness could be seen on her face as she considered her final words. I bit my lip as her eyes landed on me, wondering all the while how I could ever deserve someone so incredible. Holding my gaze, she raised the cup to toast, and said, to all the things that should have stopped us but didn't, and to the things that never will. Cheers. And cheer they did. Bella lifted the cup to her lips, taking the first mouthful of butter beer, while everyone around her screamed their applause, not just for the speech itself, but for everything they had achieved during the last 8 years of adversity. Every contribution, no matter how small, had made a difference, and this was perhaps the last opportunity that the members of Gryffindor House would have to celebrate it all together. One after another, they took their turn. When the butter beer ran out, there were extra supplies to refill the cup. What made it even better was that I had a place in it all. As Bella threw her arms around me, I realized that she was right. Trips to Italy and venom in her blood hadn't stopped either of us. Bella was as persistent as ever, refusing to let the odds deter her from pursuing a life with me. That in itself was a miracle in my eyes. I love you, I said, staring down into her face. Gently, she stroked my chest, gazing up at me from beneath her lashes. As I love you, my grin grew wider, until it was touching my eyes. I've just remembered that I have something for you. Her brow furrowed at my words. I laughed loudly, before bending down to lay a sloppy kiss on her cheek. That's from Seamus. I did the same on the other side, earning a giggle from the joyful witch. That's from Dean. And this one, Bella arched an eyebrow, waiting for my next gift, as ever so slowly, I lowered my face to hers, is from me. I barely suppressed a growl as she deepened the kiss, knotting her fingers with my hair. I would have stayed that way forever, but finally we were interrupted. My siblings were staring at us with expressions of amusement. Hungry, Bella, Emmett laughed, to which the girl responded with a roll of her eyes. The other players joined us then. Harry was carrying the cup. It was filled to the brim with a new substance, one that could only be the unique potion sold in Honeydukes. Everyone else has had their turn except you lot, Ron announced, looking at my siblings and me. Ready to taste victory? You actually serious? Jasper blinked. Of course. Did you think we were joking? My brother didn't seem to know how to respond to that. Owing to the dragon's blood, he wasn't thirsty, so he didn't flinch when the members of the house team aimed their wands at their fingers, nor did his mouth water, as it would have done once upon a time, when he smelled the different samples of blood. Still, he appreciated the bouquet, smiling in anticipation as 7 ruby droplets fell into the potion. The newly created compound scent was absolutely divine, obviously not as incredible as Bella's concentrated essence, but far more appealing than those of the others. Because she was my singer, it was only natural that Bella's scent would make those of her friends that little bit more appealing, not that they weren't already. They just weren't Bella. That smells pretty amazing, Emmett admitted, peering into the cup. I had to agree with him. Alice was the first to drink. A blissful moan escaped her as she savored the taste. Jasper, Rosalie and Emmett produced the same reaction, and I almost had to wrestle the cup from the latter. Just before I guzzled down the last of the potion, I gazed over at my smiling witch, linking the fingers of my left hand with her right. Bringing it up to my lips, I kissed it lovingly, the image of her final seconds as a Gryffindor chaser blazing brilliantly in my mind, where it would remain untarnished forevermore. To victory, I asked. Whether she knew it or not, my questioning referred as much to the future as it did to the past and present. Bella nodded. To victory. And with that, I took the offering into myself, the potential for our lives swimming behind my closed eyelids. The flavor was out of this world. It was everything I imagined victory to be, burning and wonderful and sweet and delicious. It slipped down my throat as easily as warm butter, and as I stood there, consuming the last few mouthfuls, Neville had an epiphany. Alice gasped, and a succession of welcomed images fluttered into my head. Very soon, Neville would approach Carlisle. He would tell my father that he wanted to try. The potion would not work the first time around, it would need a tweak, but the final outcome was set in stone. The parents of the boy who had chopped off the head of a snake would recover. Granted, there would always be a part of them that would long to forget, and they would never be the cheerful couple that they had been all those years ago. The scars would never fully disappear, but someday soon, very soon, in fact Alice and Frank Longbottom would say hello to their son, and he would say hello in return. The last drop of blood slipped past my lips, and as it did, I exchanged a knowing stare with my sister. Soon, Edward, she promised. With our arms wrapped around our mates, everything was as it should be. I nodded back at her. Yes, very soon. The end. Thanks for watching.